G'day, mate. Forney here. So remember back in the halcyon days of Donald Trump's first run for the presidency, 2015, 2016, we heard a lot about how Donald Trump was playing 3D chess, that what looked to you like a boneheaded error. All right, that was just Donald Trump playing 3D chess. Then Donald Trump finally gets into the presidency, and it became obvious that he's not a very effective executive. All right, he's not very good at running things, and frequently he just looked lost over his head and ineffective. So overall, I agree with the direction of Donald Trump's politics. I believe that he did a far better than average job as president of the United States, but the sad fact remains that Donald Trump is not particularly good at running things. And so too, I don't believe that the Democratic Party is mounting some elaborate operation to get Joe Biden off the ballot by planning this early debate so that Joe Biden would humiliate himself and then they could swoop in with their preferred candidate, right? I don't think the deep state is running Joe Biden. Instead, we hear that the people that Joe Biden is looking to for his advice is Dr. Jill Biden, his wife, all right, who's got about the softest PhD you can imagine in education, and his crack addict son, Hunter Biden. So I think we often attribute strategic planning to scenarios where there's not really so much strategic planning going on. All right, remember a lot of the conversation about how Twitter was dead? Well, now it's pretty clear that Twitter is not dead. The number one place to go for a conversation about Joe Biden's cognitive decline is on Twitter, right? People went to Twitter for discussion of the debate and Joe Biden's disastrous performance. And you can't say that Twitter is dead. All right, this is from Semaphore.
That's still an option if he still believes that that's an option after this debate.
All right, this was recorded the night of the debate.
What you're seeing for the first time is, rather than it just being a handful of small commentators here and there, people like Ezra Klein or David Axelrod, who've taken a lot of flack for calling on Biden to potentially, step aside or for the Democrats to consider someone else. I think what you're really seeing is that becoming a more mainstream opinion.
Yeah, the big question is going to be, over the next few days, do former presidents, do members of the U.S. Senate, people like that, come out publicly? And I'm not sure they will. I think the train is pretty far out of the station. But actually it's kind of interesting because I think that I've written Twitter's obituary a lot of times, but I do think you see this really, really centralized political conversation.
Yeah, you were wrong, right? You wrote Twitter's obituary many times and you were wrong. Just like the media wrote Donald Trump's obituary many times and it was wrong.
That is just propelling a national narrative here.
Twitter does matter in earthquakes and in presidential debates. This is when we pay attention to Twitter. What is actually happening in the country? Now, here's a media strategy.
So, yeah, Twitter remains the number one place to talk about breaking news. All right, one of the best reporters on Joe Biden's cognitive decline is Alex Thompson from Axios. He frequently appears on CNN.
Well, so I think there are two conversations happening here, which is, one, can Joe Biden still beat Trump? But I think that has obscured what is potentially even a more important conversation, which is, can he do the job he is running for 4.5 years from now? Is he mentally fit to actually do that job? And I think that's the question a lot of Democrats are asking. It's like, well, it's not just about can he win? It's like, what happens if he does win? A year from now, 2 years from now? And, will he start missing stuff? Will he have to step down? And, there's more to being president than not being Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Well, so I think there are two conversations happening here, which is, one, can...
And
I do find it really striking the fact that, Anita and Bob, while their names are being out there and blamed, they're also the ones that have been around him for the shortest amount of time. And I mean, they've been with him since 2015. But, Steve Ricchetti, Bruce Reed, Mike Donnellan have been with him for decades and are not being blamed in this conversation, which is really striking. And even though I think Megan says that she's seen them speak truth to power, there is a feeling among a lot of Biden worlds that they are much less willing to do that to Joe Biden than Anita and Bob and Ron Klain have been. And part of this is because there is a culture within parts of Biden world that if you raise problems, that it can be deemed as potentially disloyal. And so I think the most important aides right now are Mike Donnellan, Bruce Reed, Steve Ricchetti, Anthony Bernal, First Lady's top advisor, and Annie Tomasini, those are the people that are really going to determine the next 3 weeks of this presidency.
So, massively undercovered story is the abusive way that the Bidens treat their staff. They don't have advisors, they only have employees. And so people are afraid to tell them the truth.
Alex, let me start with you because we've got a lot, the data points
Alex,
coming in, right,
yep.
at this point.
There
was a statement from Seth Moulton. He didn't call him on the president to step aside, but he did say that we should have all viable options on the table. And he said that the status quo will likely deliver us President Trump. There's Reed Hastings. We kind of ticked through a whole bunch of these things that are happening. What is your latest reporting on what's going on inside the White House and what is mattering the most right now?
The vibes are bad. And the thing is that the White House has been slow to realize the severity of the crisis they are facing. Joe Biden, after appearing to many people to potentially have trouble with his senility, to be blunt about it, in debate, has still, yet 6 days later, a week later now, has not done an unscripted moment in front of cameras with reporters. He did.
And why is that? Because he can't. Right, so the Biden team is just spinning and lying and denying reality that Joe Biden is not cognitively competent to be president of the United States.
Didn't appear at all in any extemporaneous setting.
Or voters, for that matter.
Yeah, or voters.
Yeah.
And they basically bunkered down over the weekend. They basically did nothing except for that North Carolina rally. I've harped on this a few times, but they did an Annie Leibovitz photo shoot with the family as the crisis within the party has grown. Now, yesterday was the very first day you saw them try to stop this bleeding. And so he finally called Nancy Pelosi. He finally called Hakeem Jeffries.
So Joe Nacira is a reliably left-wing columnist, and he's worked at the New York Times for, over 20 years. He writes today for Bari Weiss's Free Press. He published this yesterday, 2 days ago, July 2nd. The Biden debacle is just the most recent example of what I've come to think of as the gap between what many of us believe to be true because we've seen it with our own eyes and what the arbiters of truth allow us to say. So, for example, with our own eyes, we see that different groups obviously have different gifts, that men and women have different gifts, that different religions attract different types of people. But you can't say these things out loud that racial profiling is supposedly, this great sin, but the different groups don't commit the same crimes at an equal proportion. Joe Nacira writes, on COVID, on Black Lives Matter, on Russiagate, on Hunter Biden's laptop, the elites told us there was one correct viewpoint, only till finally years later they acknowledged that our eyes hadn't misled us, the elites had. And another key story that I think is getting missed from mainstream media coverage of the Joe Biden decline story is the threat to national security. On the positive side, there's absolutely no sign of overall decline in interest in the Joe Biden decline story. So July 4 right now, and this story is still topping the news media. I've rethought some of my disparaging comments about the conservative media's treatment of the Joe Biden decline story. So yeah, I fault the conservative media for not failing to nail down the Biden decline story with overwhelming granular detail, just like the mainstream media failed to do. But for every conservative pundit who provided comfort and strength to people who saw that something was blindingly, obviously true, Joe Biden's senility and incapacity for office, and they provided comfort and strength to people that their own eyes were not deceiving them, right? The elites were downplaying the extent of Joe Biden's decline because they didn't want to provide a partisan advantage to the Republicans. They didn't want to replay the fiasco of the Hillary Clinton emails that were released during the 2016 campaign, and that helped Trump. But everybody who said publicly that Joe Biden was senile, such as talk show host Michael Smerconish, centrist pundit Mark Halperin, right? They all did the Lord's work by furthering the truth. Conservative talk radio did the Lord's work in telling people, yeah, what your eyes show you to be obviously true, that Joe Biden is senile and unfit for office, right? That is true. And so people get comfort and strength from conservative media that affirms what their eyes are seeing.
The problem is that he should have done that in the first 24 hours. And so this is potentially snowballed beyond the fact that, and it's possible that it's actually really out of their reach now.
Yeah, I mean, Megan, I guess that is my question. Why? Why did it take them nearly a full week? I mean, we are now 1 week from the debate as of today, and he's just calling these people.
Look, I don't know. I'm not there anymore. I think that they were waiting to see how this set in. I think that they had a full day of events.
Okay, she's useless. Megan Hayes, former special assistant to Joe Biden, she contributes nothing to this discussion. So let me fast forward past her bit.
Yeah. Well, one last thing, just to add to that before bringing you in, is like the other thing that's been really baffling is they can't keep their message straight. You know, the fact is that, you know, you just played that, or, you know, mentioned that Politico mentioned that he told people he had a medical checkup. Well, Karine Jean-Pierre told reporters yesterday that he didn't have a medical checkup. She also then said that it was just the cold. Then Biden said, no, it was the jet lag. Biden is still not even, he had a sore throat, but he hasn't really mentioned the cold. They cannot keep their story straight. It is a shifting explanations for a debate performance that honestly really is probably unexplainable.
Yeah, I mean, Lance Trevor, I will say the thing that stuck out to me, and then Politico is reporting this, ABC has matched it, we're working on it here at CNN. But Politico reported that the president made a knock on wood motion. I think that stuck out to me just because it's like, oh man, the president's staying in good health, knock on wood. I mean, that is a very sort of on the nose demonstration of the moment we're in.
Look, I think we also need to take a step back because
it is blindingly obvious that Joe Biden is unfit for office. He does not have the cognitive or physical or physiological capacity to serve. This should be the focus of attention. All right, Joe Biden should step down right now. Not just for running for another term, but he should leave office right now.
The issue of credibility here is because they have spent the last 3.5 years, there have been questions that have been raised for 3.5 years, and this White House has said time and again, oh, no, everything's fine, despite don't believe what you see on TV when some of these things happen. That's the issue we have right now is credibility. The Wall Street Journal had a story not 1 month ago, very well sourced, well documented story about the president's ability to serve and his fitness for office. And this White House, enraged, went out and berated every reporter and anybody else who dared to ask about it. So the underpinnings of this, as we get into their shifting explanations, are that they don't have a lot of credibility going in.
So there should be a congressional investigation of the cover-up of Joe Biden's decline and how that imperiled United States national security, just as we had an investigation after 9/11. We need the equivalent of that. And I think the rage at the Biden administration is not primarily regarding Joe Biden's poor debate performance. Rather, it is the cover-up, right? It's not the crime, it's the cover-up by Biden's team. It's the bad faith exhibited by Biden's team. So this is a definition from Cornell Law School. It's the first definition for bad faith in its legal meaning that comes up in a Google search. Bad faith refers to dishonesty or fraud in a transaction. So depending on the exact setting, bad faith may mean a dishonest belief or purpose, untrustworthy performance of duties, neglect of fair dealing standards, or fraudulent intent. So the Biden administration has been putting forth a fraud that Joe Biden is capable of holding down the responsibilities of the President of the United States. Right? They are breaching obligations inherent in the contract between the Biden administration and fellow Democrats, Biden administration and Americans, to deal with other parties in good faith and with fair dealing. And obviously the Biden administration has not been operating this way. They keep coming up with cascading different stories about Joe Biden's poor performance.
Into this, and then last Thursday night happens, and lo and behold, 50 million people
well,
are
and
like,
look, to the issue of credibility and where this has stood, we pulled together a couple examples of debate performances gone by from President Biden. Let's just watch what it was like. This is a VP debate followed by a presidential debate in 2020, followed by what we saw on Thursday. Watch.
It has never been done before.
It's been done a couple of times, actually.
It has never been
Jack
done
Kennedy
before.
lowered tax rates, increased growth. Ronald Reagan.
Now you're Jack Kennedy.
Ronald Reagan.
That is such a disgusting debating tactic. So this was the 2012 vice presidential debate, and Paul Ryan came into it prepared to discuss policy, and Joe Biden would just derail it with these cheap shots. All right. Paul Ryan was making a point about growth and tax cuts and invoking what happened when President John F. Kennedy passed a tax cut. And Paul Ryan said absolutely nothing about I'm Jack Kennedy. This was such a disgusting cheap shot that characterizes Joe Biden's political career. So I don't know why people want to honor Joe Biden's political career. I don't see it as something particularly honorable.
Reagan, Republicans and
amazing.
Democrats.
Well, it is what it is because you are who you are.
Right. So Joe Biden wanted mics muted for his latest debate, but he was happy to derail debates with cheap shots and unnecessary interruptions in his previous performances when he still had the cognitive quickness to pull it off.
That's why it is. The president has no plan. He hasn't laid out anything. He knew all the way back in February how serious this crisis was. Dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare.
I mean, Megan Hayes, it's tough. I mean, and which of those presidents did you know when you were in the White House?
I did not know the one that showed up at the debate on Thursday. That was not the person that I worked for, and that's
okay.
So that's,
She's useless.
In the interview with George Stephanopoulos is going
that he needs to go out and the voters to decide.
Pelosi said, "Is this an episode or a condition?"
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and he hasn't answered that question conclusively. And I don't think a 15-minute or 20-minute or however long the interview with George Stephanopoulos is going to satisfy those questions. Now, he has now said that he is going to do the George Stephanopoulos interview. He is going to do the big press conference next week with reporters. The problem is, I don't know if it's going to be enough. This is still a president that has done less interviews and less unscripted interactions with reporters than any in history. To Lance's point, there is a credibility problem. Reporters do not.
I mean, when Joe Biden speaks to donors this past weekend, he had to use a teleprompter and he took no questions. Right? That's unusual. So even in a private meeting with donors, that you have to use a teleprompter.
Not believe them anymore.
I mean, Joe Biden had to use a teleprompter to do interviews.
And that's part of the problem.
But it's not up to reporters to believe.
Okay, let's get
Line in the Washington Post, Democrats rallying around Harris, potential nominee. It's on the front page. As President Biden continues to face questions, there are growing signs many in the Democratic Party are willing to accept the notion of Vice President Harris at the top of their presidential ticket, a potentially significant shift. And I have to say, I've been picking this up in my reporting, too. I mean, Alex, where do you think this sort of, I mean, it's all very quiet. It's all behind the scenes. But, man, the elbows are being thrown. The conversations are being had among the people that would step up if Biden stepped aside.
Yeah, Kamala Harris is the clear front runner, and it's not clear who, if anybody, would actually challenge her for the nomination. But the thing is that she, we talked about credibility. She's going to have to, first of all, answer the fact that she's been one of the main public validators of his health. You remember after the Her report, she went out there and said he is with it. He is commanding everything in the room. She's going to have to sit down and answer tough questions. I mean, we talked about Joe Biden hasn't really been out there with reporters. Kamala Harris, besides that initial CNN and MSNBC interview right after the debate, she hasn't really been out there answering questions. And they're going to be, if Joe Biden drops out, the first week that she is out there is going to be critical. Because if there's any signs of chinks in the armor, there are many, as you just said, there are many people in the wings that are ready to pounce as soon as she shows weakness.
Right. Kamala Harris hasn't given Democrats any reason to think that she'll be a formidable candidate.
Thank you.
Panels.
Thank you.
Panels back. Alex, your reaction?
Well, so I think there are two conversations happening here, which is, one, can Joe Biden still beat Trump? But I think that has obscured what is potentially even a more important conversation, which is, can he do the job he is running for 4.5 years from now? Is he mentally fit to actually do that job? And I think that's the question a lot of Democrats are asking. It's like, well, it's not just about can he win? It's like, what happens if he does win? A year from now, 2 years from now? And, will he start missing stuff? Will he have to step down? And, there's more to being president than not being Donald Trump.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Panels. Well, I mean, that's the ultimate question hand. Megan Hayes, can you kind of take us inside the dynamics of the?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these people have been around to how the president
We don't
was
need Megan
ended by
Hayes.
some of these
She's
actions.
useless.
Jake Sullivan, there's a lot.
Useless.
Well, one thing really quick to add to that, I do find it really striking the fact that, Anita and Bob, while their names are being.
So we don't have time to listen to everyone. Why I fast forward through Megan Hayes is she just doesn't add anything. And this is how we tend to conduct ourselves in life. All right, we don't tune into what everyone's saying. We have to use heuristics. Is this person going to add something of value? And unfortunately, the longer we are in a relationship with someone, the less likely we are to listen to them because we start thinking we know everything that they're going to say.
Being out there and blamed, they're also the ones that have been around him for the shortest amount of time. And I mean, they've been with him since 2015. But, Steve Ricchetti, Bruce Reed, Mike Donnellan have been with him for decades and are not being blamed in this conversation, which is really striking. And even though I think Megyn says that she's seen them speak truth to power, there is a feeling among a lot of Biden worlds that they are much less willing to do that to Joe Biden than Anita and Bob and Ron Klain have been. And part of this is because there is a culture within parts of Biden world that if you raise problems, that it can be deemed as potentially disloyal. And so I think like the most important aides right now are Mike Donnellan, Bruce Reed, Steve Ricchetti, Anthony Bernal, First Lady's top advisor, and Annie Tomasini. Those are the people that are really going to determine the next 3 weeks of this presidency.
And of course, it's also really going to come down to his family, because this big decision to stay in the race or go is going to be very dependent on what the family thinks most of all, and possibly exclusively. The White House is pushing back on reports that First Lady Jill Biden is hiding details of her husband's condition. Other Biden family members, though, now suggesting the campaign needs to clean house. That's the staff. NBC News is reporting that Joe Biden believes that now is the time for the president to keep fighting on, and this reasoning stuck out to me. They write, quote, she pointed to all they have endured since Biden decided to run for the White House, including attacks on Hunter Biden and criminal investigations into their son that have publicly exposed some of the family's darkest and most painful moments, to make the point that now was the time to fight. Two people familiar with the conversation said. Megyn, you're nodding. Expound.
Look, I think that they are a family that's been through a lot from the time his...
Oh, wow. They've been a family who's been through a lot. That really adds to our understanding of this issue.
Sort of hold the president's hand. You want to show that you're supporting the president, but not that you have to hold his hand throughout it, because that makes the age thing look worse.
100%, but the President Obama and the First Lady are two different people. The First Lady is his wife. That is a very different dynamic and relationship, and her goal and her responsibilities as a wife and the...
Okay. Doesn't
I
add
think
anything.
because that role is different, the risk for Jill Biden is the perception that she's running the show, right?
Absolutely, but I think that, as everyone knows here how media does their timing, this was probably planned a long time ago, months in advance. Obviously, that photo and the cover was put together weeks ago.
Absolutely.
I don't think that they were planning to have Thursday night happen the way that they were. Obviously, we're all sitting here talking about that they had a slow strategy to solve the problem, so they didn't have a plan B here, right? Yeah. So I think that that's a little bit of an unfair criticism. It does give that perception now. Totally fair to have that now, but I don't think this would be...
I think it also speaks a little bit. Wait a week. And really quick though on the Vogue thing, I asked them because it's the August cover. So and I asked them point blank, did you call Vogue and just say, hey, do we have to drop the digital edition? Can you wait a week? And they just did not answer. If they reached out to Vogue and asked, and I thought it was very telling, they did not answer that. I think it also speaks a little bit to the bunker mentality that nobody thought that maybe this was a potentially bad idea in terms of timing. Now, it was months in the planning. The one thing I'd be curious to get your take on, though, Megyn, is, for so much of her career, Biden's career, Jill Biden was an unenthusiastic political spouse, a reluctant political spouse. But then you've really seen, especially the last few years, but really the last several months, she's become an incredibly enthusiastic political spouse. And I'm curious if you, if you have an opinion why.
Yeah, I don't think Megyn's going to add anything.
To my knowledge, I think she taught last semester. So I think, I do think...
Yeah, she likes the trappings of power. I think it's that simple. And to push Joe Biden out there when he's clearly a senile old man, not capable of fulfilling the duties of his office, is incredibly cruel and terrible for the country. Mark Smerconish is a former right-winger who's moved towards the political center. He wrote an excellent novel about talk radio that came out around 2010, and he hosts a podcast, and he has as his guest yesterday Mark Halperin, who's the premier political reporter. So let's hear from that.
President, and he's got the delegates; they're his. So I don't know. I can think.
So Smerconish thinks that Biden has to step down. Mark Halperin says that's not likely.
On the ticket makes the gives the party the best chance to beat Donald Trump.
Okay, I want to get every word here that Mark Halperin says.
Disagree. I think he's still the most likely Democratic nominee, probably by far. I think, Michael, if you think back to Bill Clinton in 92, Donald Trump in 2016, both of them had very similar circumstances where they just said no. You can tell me all you want of people complaining and unhappiness and calling for my withdrawal. Biden has the delegates. Biden wants to be the nominee. Biden thinks his presence on the ticket gives the party the best chance to beat Donald Trump. And the time is short here. So I'm not predicting he'll hold on because I don't predict, but I still think it's the base case because the fundamentals for him haven't changed. He's behind, but he thinks he has the best chance to beat Trump. He thinks Kamala Harris would not be a strong general election candidate or a strong president. And he's got the delegates. They're his. So I don't know. I can think of a few things. And I wrote about this in the newsletter.
And Elliot Blatt says that Biden's team needs to read the 48 Laws of Power. I agree because I believe that time will be wasted time reading the 48 Laws of Power. But what do you think, Elliot Blatt? What might the Biden team find there in the 48 Laws of Power that'd be useful?
When you work at Disney, dreams can come true.
Oh, come on, man. I'm trying to run a high-quality podcast. We don't need your silly little ads. Right, back to Mark Halperin.
And he's got the delegates. They're his. So I don't know. I can think of a few things. And I wrote about this in the newsletter today. I can think of a few people, a few chains of events that would make his family have to reconsider. But right now, from everything I'm told, they're full steam ahead. And that means people in the media who want to speculate about his being dead, again, go back. I covered Bill Clinton. I covered Donald Trump. They were considered dead too. And they ended up not just being the nominees, but president.
But I think those two are different insofar as each was how would I put them together? A moral lapse. This is something different. This is physical condition that we're talking about. That's what's driving this equation.
Well, it's complicated because, as you and I have discussed, and I've written many times, Joe Biden's condition at the debate should not have surprised anybody. And I'm shocked that people are claiming to be shocked and think they can get away with it. So, and the American people, the polls clearly showed, despite the media's conspiracy with the Biden team to hide this, the American people knew. And the fact that the polls haven't collapsed is, I believe, testament to the reality that it was a bit priced into the stock. I'm not saying it won't hurt him in the polls because I know it has and it will. What I'm saying is you can say, and people have persuasively made this argument, including my friend Mika Brzezinski. This is a problem with Joe Biden that voters don't like. There's a lot of problems with Donald Trump that voters don't like too. And if you want to stack up all the problems Biden has, I appreciate people like my friend Mark McKinnon who says this is so disqualifying, nobody should vote for Biden. But there are plenty of things about Donald Trump that people don't like, and for whom many Americans find those things disqualifying. So I didn't think he was the favorite to win before. I don't think he's the favorite to win now. But that doesn't mean he's going to just walk away and hand the nomination that he won to somebody else.
As recently as June 4, the Wall Street Journal, I know that Annie Linsky was involved in the reporting. She may have been in that lead position because I had her on CNN on Sunday. They wrote a story that candidly didn't have much meat on the bone, but it was a story based on 45 interviews over a period of months saying that in private, he was not up to snuff. And they were hammered for it, especially by the White House, who said it was a Republican hit job. Now here we are one day shy of July 4, a month later, and you've got a 4-person byline on the front page above the fold of the New York Times. And as I read it, Mark, and as I tweeted, I couldn't help but wonder how many similar stories are being written as we speak and by outlets that heretofore wouldn't have touched it, but now are.
Well, some, but not many, because the Journal's already done it. And the Times now done it. There are just, unfortunately in America, there aren't that many news organizations that can devote the resources to reporting that story and have the sources to report.
Right. So reporting that story means talking to people who can recount specific examples of Joe Biden's cognitive decline and how it was significant, right? You can't just look at videos and make suppositions. If you want to have a granular, fact-based story that carries weight with the mainstream media, right? People who note that the president is senile, like everyone who's done that has done the Lord's work because they've drawn attention to an important story.
Report that story. I've reported it, and one of the things that the Times reported, again, I don't mean to sound like I'm patting myself on the back, I'm just trying to represent my understanding of this thing. I reported what the Times reported, which is he actually has gotten worse in the last few months. And that offers you a fuller picture of what's gone on here. But he's been bad since at least 2018 when I saw him do a public event and was saddened. So will other people write stories about this? Maybe, but I'm not expecting that many because of what I said in terms of the number who could do it, and because the clock's ticking here. Like there's stories that are much more forward-looking and yet another piece with examples. I think the thing that the Times story got at, and Politico yesterday also got at it, which I think there will be a fuller accounting of someday, maybe not before the election, is the way the White House operated to try to both hide Biden's conduct from the public and.
Yeah, Elliot Blatt just knows things. All right, I may belong to the reality community, but Elliot Blatt belongs to the change the world community. So I look at the facts on the ground, but Elliot Blatt and his cohort are changing the facts on the ground. So Elliot Blatt just knows things. He doesn't need sources. He doesn't need facts. He has his vision.
When you work at Disney...
Oh, come on, man. What the hell? I'm trying to run a high-quality podcast here.
Line on the front page above the fold of the New York Times. And as I read it, Mark, and as I tweeted, I couldn't help but wonder how many similar stories are being
written. So will other people write stories about this? Maybe, but I'm not expecting that many because of what I said in terms of there'll be a fuller accounting of someday, maybe not before the election, is the way the White House operated to try to both hide Biden's conduct from the public and some officials who he dealt with, and to lash out at it and try to intimidate anybody who tried to write about it or explore it.
I thought that the most stunning part of the Times story was the view from abroad, where they said that the European leaders who hadn't seen him were, quote unquote, shocked by what they saw in terms of difference over the past year.
Yeah, that's important when Joe Biden's cognitive decline puts America's national security at risk and inhibits the performance of his duties.
When you work at...
Oh, come on, man. I guess I just can't pause this podcast without without it automatically resetting to the beginning.
That the Italian prime minister and the other leaders were sensitive to his physical condition, talked about it privately among themselves, tried to avoid embarrassing him, slowed down their own gait, et cetera, et cetera. And when they worried that he didn't seem poised and cameras were around, they closed ranks around him physically to shield him while he collected himself. That's really a troublesome picture of a world leader. I mean, it breaks my heart, but that's a problem.
Yeah, Michael, it is. But again, you don't need inside reporting from great sources at the top of foreign governments to report that story. All of those exact things are visible on footage available on YouTube.
Right.
There's nothing you read just now. There's nothing you read literally that you couldn't get almost entirely from just watching video of his public events.
Okay, let me say this. I think that you're being humble. I think you're entitled to a victory lap of sorts, because over a period of years, you have speculated or invoked your spidey sense that there were known incidents or stories. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you have left me as the host of this program, and I know my listeners.
Right. So there are many sources of knowledge. There's the empirical knowledge. There is knowledge that we get from elites, right? But there's also the knowledge that we get from our intuition. Right, there's a sense of feeling that we get about things that we may not be able to immediately put into words. We may not be able to immediately attribute to this fact or that fact. And so it's not as though empirical granular evidence is just inherently superior to intuition. On the other hand, I don't put intuition on the pedestal. It's the source of knowledge that outweighs all other sources of knowledge, right? There are many types of knowing. There's a physical sense of knowing. There is the knowing that you may get from your particular hero system. There's empirical knowing. There's firsthand knowing. There's knowing that you get from friends and trusted sources. There's expertise.
Incidents or stories. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you have left me as the host of this program, and I know my listeners, with the impression that there were things going on and that people knew about them, but they didn't want to say, and they sure as hell didn't want to report.
I appreciate that. I've gotten some nice notes today from people making the same, giving me the same kudos. I'll just say, first of all, I'm sad for America and I'm sad for the Biden family. But second, I don't deserve a Pulitzer because all I did was talk to people who spent time with Joe Biden and watch public video. I mean, I would talk to people who'd known him for years and they would say, it's not the same guy. I know it's not the same guy because I've known him a long time. So
right.
I'm deeply troubled by the fact that you have a bunch of people whose full-time jobs are to tell people what's going on with the president of the United States as journalists, and almost all of them completely failed to report the truth. I'll say, because we're past due for our caveat, Donald Trump has mental issues too and aging issues. Donald Trump has lots of things that need to be scrutinized and have been, but more needs to be done. This isn't about making the whole election about one thing that's wrong with Joe Biden. Absolutely. But the things about Donald Trump have been pretty well covered. I don't know that the things about Joe Biden have been, except now when it is probably too late for the American people and the Democratic Party to do anything about it.
Okay, you've made yourself clear that it's overwhelmingly likely, however you worded it, that he remains the nominee. But humor me. What if he quits?
This is the Smerconish Podcast from SiriusXM.
Okay, Michael Smerconish here talking to Mark Halperin. So anyone have experience with trying to maintain a narrative in the face of reality, right? You have a certain story, but nobody will cooperate with your story, right? How then are you able to hold on to it in the face of that overwhelming opposition?
And his party is divided. The Republican Party is pretty united around Trump in terms of elected officials. He's going to have trouble raising money. He's going to have trouble winning news cycles. He's going to have trouble getting the focus back on Trump because really through the end of the election, no matter what happens, people are going to be scrutinizing his every move and how much he's campaigning or not campaigning, how much he's using teleprompter or not using teleprompter. So, the reason why they want.
Yeah, once a narrative gets set, all right, then everyone tends to see things through that frame, right? It's the concept, right? So Israel was devastated in the 1973 Yom Kippur War and in the October 7, 2023 Hamas attack on southern Israel because their concept did not allow for what the enemy did. The United States was devastated on Pearl Harbor and on 9/11 because its national security concept did not take into consideration what the enemy did. So we all tend to have concepts about reality. Very common concept that people have about reality is that I'm too valuable to be fired. All right, that I'm irreplaceable at work. That's a concept that will get you humiliated.
Want him out is not because they're morally offended at his not telling the truth to the country about his condition, because they think he'll be a disaster, not just for himself and losing to Trump, but for other Democratic candidates. I think he needs, in the interview on Friday and his next two public appearances, certainly at his convention, he needs to try to fight back into this. But if you look at his approval rating, if you look at people's doubts about him, none of which is going to be helped, to say the least, by the debate, I would say we've gone from Trump being a mild favorite to being a pretty heavy favorite right now, with time for Biden to fight back if he's got it in him.
Can Donald Trump control himself? Can he continue to let Biden be the issue?
Well, he's got to pick a running mate and have a convention. So he's going to be more at the fore for that. Although if they do it well, it can be positive. Look, we've said this before. Trump is more under control than he's ever been on the national stage, in large part because he's got a senior campaign staff who he trusts and who understand keeping him in control is to his benefit. And again, as we've discussed, he's got every incentive to win to make it less likely he goes to prison. So I think, look at right now, Trump could be out there every day talking about, the divisions in the Democratic Party and Biden's debate performance. He's not doing it. It's really unprecedented restraint on his part. He's doing a little bit on social media, but I think based on the evidence right now, Trump will be more in control and will pick his spots and will work with his team to leverage this for maximum benefit. One issue that they haven't done yet, which I think could be devastating, is national security. And the press continues to not cover this. how could anyone look at the man on the stage at the debate on Thursday and say, if there's a nuclear crisis or an invasion of Taiwan in the middle of the night, that guy's ready to be commander in chief? Maybe a different version of that guy could be. But believe me, before November, if Biden's the nominee, the Trump campaign will do a lot of messaging on that.
And Mark, can I say that, as I think you know, Admiral Stavridis, former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, is a regular guest on the program. He was here yesterday, and we were talking about the heightened alert that now exists on bases in Western Europe, U.S. bases in Western Europe. You know the Foreign Affairs essay that was published recently by Graham Allison and Mike Morrell saying the lights are blinking red. Richard Clark, who advised 3 presidents, has been a frequent guest on this program. They're all saying the same thing, like, you know, the bells are ringing. And that was before this debate performance. I want to say something else to Mark Halperin in response to what you said. I did not see something coming. I'm not surprised by the outcome of the immunity decision. What I had not anticipated, I wish I had, I should have thought more deeply about it. I had not anticipated that the immunity decision would be such that it would cause the delay of Trump's sentencing. I always thought that there was a guaranteed bump for Biden coming because now Donald Trump was going to get sentenced by Judge Merchan. I know they postponed it to September. I'm still not convinced it even happens in September. So the relief that Biden perhaps would be getting from all of Trump's legal peril is very much in doubt now, especially where that January 6th case is never going to get tried before Election Day.
Well, 100%, although I will say, I did a lot of reporting on this, I'm not sure if Merchan had sentenced him to prison, which I think he was poised to do, potentially at least. I'm not sure that would have hurt Trump. I think it certainly would have helped him raise more money. But given the reaction to that case, at least on the right, I'm not sure a prison sentence hurts Trump. I think it would have hurt him with some voters, but it might have helped him net. But you know, when you're predicting the pacing of the wheels of justice, predict they'll grind slowly. I agree. And not only the sentencing might be delayed, but Merchan, before the sentencing, says he's going to rule on whether the Supreme Court decision impacts the successful prosecution in the New York case. So that would be a big win for Trump too, just politically. And I think right now he's on a massive winning streak. He's on a massive winning streak. But the fact that he's not in the polling we've seen so far jumped out to a huge lead can be very encouraging to the Democrats, because Trump couldn't be asking for a better run of luck here. And yet again, Biden is in the game, at least based on the polling we've seen so far. That could change by Friday if it's a bad interview. But as of now, you know, on the legal front, the political front, on the Biden, you know, debate front, Trump is just enjoying, you know, a very strong run of luck here and good fortune, some of which he's made himself, but some of which is just pure happenstance in his favor.
And finally, for Mark Halperin, in the wide world of news today, it was a quiz. Only one of the following developments could cause the Biden family to change its mind and the president to drop out of the race. Notice the wording, ladies and gentlemen, could cause the Biden family to change its mind and the president to drop out of the race. Which one is it, you ask? Are you prepared to reveal what on the list is the answer?
Well, I'll tell you what I think the most likely thing is, but it was written in a way to suggest everybody could choose their own adventure and figure out what they thought it would be. I think if Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer go to the White House, maybe with Nancy Pelosi too, and they say, very similar to what happened with Nixon and Watergate, we can go public and call as a group representing all House and Senate Democrats, or most of them, that you need to not run. Or you can decide that on your own and you can control it. But we're going to say that. I think that's really at this point the only thing on my list, and it's a long list of things that are, you know, working against him staying in the race. I think that's the only thing that would really force them to reconsider. I'm not even sure they changed their mind, but I think that would at least force them to reconsider, because that would be very strong if the head of the 2 congressional leaders said, your choice, we'll call for you to step down, or you can step down from being the nominee. I think that would be a tough thing for the family to grapple with.
Okay, Mark Halperin there. If you just follow one person on American politics, Mark Halperin would be my choice as the best observer of American politics. Michael Smerconish, a centrist podcast host, frequent guest on CNN. often has something important to add. And this crisis shows that Hakeem Jeffries, the minority leader in the U.S. House of Representatives, all right, he is formidable. He is disciplined. He doesn't say things stupidly, doesn't fly off the handle. So it appears that the Democrats have a formidably competent leader in the U.S. House of Representatives. All right. A lot of good stuff there on the Michael Smerconish show. I was listening back to previous episodes, and I think he consistently nails the story. Right? He is just.
When you work at Disney, dreams can come.
Was a lying
episode or a condition. Okay, I'm asking exactly that. The way that we worded it, Nancy Pelosi says it's fair to ask if Biden's debate was an episode or a condition. Which do you think it was? Go vote at Smerconish.
All right, that she would even say that is significant.
Of President Biden's debate performance and the very latest reporting and information on what's going on. I think we have reached a tipping point. Yeah, I really do. I think we've reached a point from which there's no recovery. I base that on the fact that there's a combination of reporting, media not inclined to challenge President Biden, now doing so, Democrats growing restless, the feeling that the dam is starting to break. At 6:30 tonight on this Wednesday night going into the 4th of July weekend, I think that's a tell. You think that the governors want to come to Washington at the start of an extended weekend to sit down with the president? I don't, but they want reassurance. And there's a report out there that 25 House members are prepared to jump ship if they see more sign of decline. President's going to sit down on Friday with George Stephanopoulos. ABC's going to play a piece of that on Friday night and then air the totality of the interview on Sunday. And a press conference is being planned in the near future, although you may have heard me say yesterday, why did the president blow a golden opportunity on Monday when the immunity decision was released? Why, when he came out Monday night, did he not just stand there for an hour and a half, 2 hours and take questions? Instead, he spoke for 5 minutes and then retreated into the White House. I just don't see the momentum shifting.
The Smerconish Podcast from SiriusXM.
Come on,
when you
man.
work at Disney.
podcast on your favorite podcast app.
I just don't see the momentum shifting. Not where now every step and every breath will be under a microscope. Those 12 of 20 links today at Smerconish.com, I mean, just run through them. Scroll on your phone.
Okay, so Smerconish also nailed it right after Joe Biden's debate.
When you work at...
We couldn't accommodate all those who wanted to attend. Hey, that the poll question today, the Friday post poll question.
So this is his show, June 28th, right after the debate on June 27th. Oh, come on, man.
Either measured through the national vote or the 6 or 7 battleground states, nothing has moved the needle thus far. And I can't imagine that the debate would move the needle. I said it would take something major to move the needle post-debate. Also drew on the fact that G. Elliott Morris at 538 said, typically in the modern era, there's been a 2.4% shift in the 2 weeks that follow a first debate. I didn't think that there would be anything monumental. I did not anticipate what did occur last night. That is not the poll question at Smerconish.com. I am not asking, did it change anything? It absolutely changed everything, I think. So much so that the poll question today at my website instead asks, will Joe Biden be the Democratic nominee? And I have serious doubts that he will. That was not just another poor first debate performance by an incumbent president. In other words, this was not Ronald Reagan in 1984. This was not Barack Obama in 2012. They both obviously rebounded and won their re-election battles. This was not Rust. This was not President Ford with a single poor response. It happened to be about Soviet domination of Eastern Europe. This was not George Herbert Walker Bush 41, looking at his watch In other words, it was not a one-off. This is sad to say. It brings me no joy. What ails Joe Biden cannot be fixed. It eventually comes for us all.
Yeah, that's perhaps the most important point about Joe Biden's decline, is that it cannot be fixed.
And before the debate, I said that delivery would matter more than substance. We had this conversation yesterday. I said relative to Trump, we want to look at his temperament. And relative to Biden, we want to look at his mental acuity, meaning how things were said would matter more than what was said. And that's exactly what went down. And after the debate, others confirmed my prognostication. And in other words, the Washington Post essentially took my words. This debate may not be remembered for what was said, but rather how it was said. That's verbatim what I said before it even occurred. The Post said the question is whether Americans will see past the style and evaluate the substance. No. Because this was not a substantive performance by either of them. What I got wrong, as long as I'm patting myself on my back, what I got wrong yesterday and for the last couple of days was my prediction that Trump and his enablers had so lowered the expectation bar for Biden that he would be easily able to exceed it. Well, he couldn't, and he didn't. No matter how low that bar was moved, he couldn't step over it. And let me say this right up front. Donald Trump littered the debate stage with falsehoods. You know, we've heard all those lies before. CNN did a post-debate fact-check analysis. They said that Trump made 30 false...
Okay, that was analysis from Michael Smerconish. The number one issue in the United States of America is crime and its destruction of quality of life. And it's unnecessary because all you have to do is put the violent super predators in prison. Right? Here's a story from Oakland. Right, 13 elderly Asian residents of the Westlake Christian Terrace Assisted Living Facility in Oakland have been robbed or beaten in less than a week's time, according to their resident council president. The actual number is closer to 30. Many have just not reported the attacks out of shame and fear.
You just grab their purse, but then you beat them brutally. We have several that had to be taken to the emergency. One broke their wrist. We had police on Saturday, almost 7 hours, filing reports, residents filing reports. And then it continued on Sunday with multiple residents being attacked.
All right, more from CNN here.
On this Independence Day, President Biden is weighing a decision that many in his party believe is critical to the future of the republic. The president meeting Wednesday with more than 20 Democratic governors to try and shore up their support. Politico reporting that he told them he had a medical checkup after the debate.
So there's a lot of cognitive strain doing a live stream like this in OBS. And I often have to make a choice between the video quality and the audio quality. So when I have to juggle those decisions, I usually put a priority on the audio quality.
And that he's in good health, but that he knocked on wood for effect. Knock on wood. Afterwards, several governors insisted they are still behind him.
President Joe Biden is in it to win it.
Is Kathy Hochul one of the least effective, least impressive governors of a major state that we have today? I mean, New York spent tens of millions of dollars setting up congestion pricing, and then she abandons it.
All of us said we pledged our support to him because the stakes could not be higher.
What we saw in there today was a guy who was the guy that all of us believed in the first time who could beat Donald Trump.
But behind the scenes, there are increasing concerns that Biden's faltering debate performance could put blue states in play for Republicans in a way that would be unimaginable otherwise, including potentially New Mexico, New Hampshire, Virginia, Maine. This comes as a New York Times Siena College survey found Trump now leads 49 to 43% among likely voters nationally, picking up a 3-point swing from a week earlier before the debate. A Biden ally telling CNN that the president has privately acknowledged the reality that he may not be able to continue and that the next few days are critical. His ABC interview now set to air in prime time on Friday night. Here's what the president had to say in a radio interview Wednesday.
I had a bad night. And the fact of the matter is that, I screwed up. I made a mistake. That's 90 minutes on stage. Look at what I've done in 3.5 years.
Biden spokeswoman Karine Jean-Pierre enduring another brutal day behind the podium trying to explain what happened.
It's the jet lag and also the cold, right? It is the two things, and that occurred. And you all heard it in his voice when he did the debate, right? And it is not even something that we shared ahead of time.
So if Joe Biden has a cold, why is he getting out there and shaking hands with people?
You heard it in his voice, and we confirmed it.
And this morning, the White House waking up to the news that Reed Hastings, the Netflix co-founder and top Democratic donor, is calling for Biden to step aside. And I can tell you from my conversations with Democrats, the message that many are sending to President Biden is a tougher version of what Maryland Governor Wes Moore had.
So I think the mainstream media are furious that they are seen now as having carried water and protected a cognitively impaired Joe Biden. They feel that Joe Biden's team has operated in bad faith. They're particularly sensitive with regard to accusations of ageism and ableism, and so their liberal worldview blinded them to something that was obviously true. And I'll give the mainstream media credit. I think they are doing a more focused and intense and fair coverage now since the debate last week of Joe Biden's cognitive decline than what the right-wing media would do if the situation were reversed and it was Donald Trump who was president of the United States in obvious cognitive decline.
Had to say after that meeting with governors.
I think that.
So, yeah, both the mainstream media and the right-wing media are biased. All right, we all have our hero system. It's just that right-wing media, particularly Fox News, is much more partisan, I believe, than the mainstream media.
You know, we always believe that when you love someone, you tell them the truth. And I think we came in and we were honest about the feedback that we were getting. We were honest about the concerns that we were hearing from people.
All right, our panel's here. Let's bring in Alex Thompson, national political reporter for Axios, Megan Hayes, former special assistant to President Biden, and Lance Trover, former spokesperson for North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum's 2024 presidential campaign. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here on this holiday that doesn't quite feel like a holiday here in Washington. We're just rolling right along with this news. Alex, let me start with you because we've got a lot, there's a lot of data points coming in, right, at this point. There was a statement from Seth Moulton. He didn't call him on the president to step aside, but he did say that we should have all viable options on the table. And he said that the status quo will likely deliver us President Trump. There's Reed Hastings. We kind of ticked through a whole bunch of these things that are happening. What is your latest reporting on what's going on inside the White House and what is mattering the most right now?
The vibes are bad. And the thing is that the White House has been slow to realize the severity of the crisis they are facing. Joe Biden, after appearing to many people to potentially have trouble with his senility, to be blunt about it, in debate, has still, yet 6 days later, a week later now, has not.
Okay, I played that earlier, so hope to get Colin Liddell onto the show here any minute. Bari Weiss had Alex Thompson on her
from the
podcast
Free. It's actually
yesterday.
been running the. Oi. Well, today I've invited Axios' national political correspondent, Alex Thompson, onto the show to help us make sense of what is actually going on and what might come next. Alex has been covering Biden for years, and he's one of the few reporters who long before Thursday night dared report on the subject of Biden's health. He has been dominating this beat, and there's just no one better situated to break down how the Biden camp is dealing with the fallout since the debate. We also talk about who might replace Biden if he does indeed drop out, what happens to Biden's campaign war chest, why the media missed this story for months, whether it was intentional or just incompetent, how Democrats have managed to do a complete 180 on Biden, and also what this could mean for the future.
So,
from the Free Press.
Oh, come on, man. It's so hard to cue these up here on the Apple podcast, but the media has often talked about Joe Biden's age, right? You can't seriously claim that the media never talked about Joe Biden's cognitive problems. They just obviously didn't give it sufficient attention.
Are coming across the board, whether people are concerned about their seats or not.
That's right. And this is all from leaks that we're gathering, and few people have spoken openly on the Democrat side of the aisle about what's happening. But here's Van Jones. He's a big-time Dem. Here's what he said's going on.
Everybody comes on the air and says all this great stuff, but behind the scenes, it's full-scale panic. People are passing around legal memos, PDFs are flying back and forth on WhatsApp, trying to figure out what are the options, how can you replace Biden, how do you get him to do it in a way where he feels respected as he should be respected, who should Kamala Harris's vice president be. The conversation on air and the conversation off air are completely different. But there is a big conversation happening right now about how this happens, not whether.
I mean, there's PDFs going around, Doctor.
Okay, let's get Colin Liddell onto the show. Colin Liddell, anything about this Joe Biden cognitive decline story that you find particularly interesting?
Not really. It's just some guy who's really old and who's starting to behave in the way that we kind of expect people of his age to behave. And of course, the only remarkable thing is that he managed to end up as president of the United States at this very advanced age. So I think it's all pretty obvious. The guy's too old for the job. He shouldn't have been there in the first place. He kind of ended up there as a kind of anti-Trump. Back in 2020, the Democratic Party was a bit stuck for somebody of a similar kind of name recognition and status to go up against Trump, and they landed on him. And it seemed to just about work with the way that the election was run. But there was a downside, which was that he was pretty much too old, pretty much senile, and they were hoping that maybe he could hold together for a few more months until the election was over. But that strategy has been exposed. That as pretty much a gamble. So I think they've lost the gamble with Biden.
So do you think that the media undercovered this story? Do you think they're engaged in a partisan conspiracy to silence this story? What's your perspective on the media and this story of Joe Biden's obvious decline?
Well, I think the media didn't really hide this from us very well, so it's been an open secret. They might have been emphasizing Biden's positives, and in a way, I guess the Biden administration has kind of held things together, but it's always been about who's the top guy. He might have some quite competent people working for him, but it's all about the top guy at the end of the day. And they were kind of hoping that the wheels would come off Trump first. And Trump's he's still hanging on. He obviously has his problems, and probably any other candidate besides Joe Biden would be able to blow him apart at this stage.
What would you anticipate from a second Donald Trump term in office?
Well, I think Donald Trump, basically his goal is to be accepted and to be assimilated into the ruling elite. And so he likes to be liked. And, he's not as radical as a lot of people fear. He would push certain policies, and whether you agree with those policies or not, I think you could say they are legitimate policies. He wants to change the relationship with Europe and within NATO, and he takes a different view towards Putin. He's more of an appeaser, we could say. He kind of basically wants to give the Sudetenland to Putin, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think is the significance of what appears to be a massive victory coming for the Labour Party in the United Kingdom?
No, Lou, we don't know. We don't know that. I mean, the only poll that matters is the one that takes place on election day, and after all of the votes have been duly counted and the spoilt ballots removed.
Well, Labor seems to have an effective strategy, and they seem to have run a disciplined campaign, and they seem to be led by someone who's pragmatic and disciplined. Is that fair?
Yeah, well, Labour are actually quite clever at running elections. They do take elections seriously. They do take politics quite seriously. The Conservative Party, by contrast, it tends to take a more amateurish view of politics and politicking. And that's because most of the people in the Conservative Party are quite well off. They've got other irons in the fire. Whereas for the Labour Party, for the Labour Party core members, the Labour Party is the only game in town. That is their way up. It's their greasy pole. It's their ladder. And so they do take politics a bit more seriously. They tend to be more professional at politics, and they've played this campaign quite carefully. They've kept their powder dry. They've kept their cards close to their chest. They've tried not to spook the horses, etc., etc. And the Tories, unfortunately for them, has the incumbent. They've been the recipient of all this kind of dark energy and bad karma that's been released over the last few years. And they haven't really found an effective strategy to deflect that. And so it's kind of been a bit unfair what's happened to Rishi Sunak in a way, and I think he'll be glad to just get out of it. I mean, one theory is that he actually called the election this early because he just wanted to get it over and done with.
Now, one issue that has not worked out to the Conservatives' advantage is immigration. They keep promising to crack down on immigration, but they have not been very effective. They seem to be insuperable obstacles for the government in Britain to crack down on immigration. It just seems to be a task that's too difficult for them. Any thoughts on that issue in particular in Great Britain?
Well, it's a complex issue, but one of the things that I was thinking about today was that the problem is that Britain aspires to be an egalitarian society, and what that means is that people at the bottom of the heap have a sense of social injustice, and also people at the bottom of society are unwilling to do the kind of jobs that you expect the underclass to do. And so if your own underclass is reluctant to do the jobs that they should be doing and are preferring to stay on welfare or hold out for something better, then you end up almost having to import a new underclass. And then that new underclass manages to assimilate itself into the egalitarian welfare culture. And then you have to kind of rinse and repeat. So there are a lot of structural problems with the problem of demographics and immigration, and the way that labor is apportioned through the economy. I think Rishi's government has been trying to tackle this a bit belatedly. And I also think a lot of the immigration upsurge was down to the kind of fecklessness of Boris Johnson, who kind of took his eye off the ball in a lot of ways, and who was always kind of quite accommodating with people who had a word in his ear. And there are a lot of lobby groups in the UK that favour immigration. One of them is the NHS. They're very keen to bring in cheap labour from overseas to tackle the various demeaning tasks that the NHS has to handle. We also have a massive educational sector. A lot of that is run on foreign students. A lot of those foreign students actually use education visas to come into the country and do jobs, other jobs, and not strictly to study. So they've kind of, there's been a lot of, what's the word? There's been a lot of basic negligence and kind of wishful thinking about immigration in Britain. And the Conservative Party kind of woke up a bit late and realized that this was going to really bite them on the butt. And they started to try to do something. They came up with this Rwanda policy, which I always thought it was a bit unworkable. It was going to break down at some stage. I mean, even if they got re-elected, I'm sure at some stage this Rwanda policy would have broken down. It wouldn't have provided the deterrent they were hoping to. Rishi was also clamping down on all these additional visas, like for family members of people coming to study in the UK, things like that. But it was all rather unconvincing, and it seemed to be because they were losing popularity with their core voters, and an election was on the horizon. And so you couldn't really trust the Conservatives to continue with their sort of belated hardline on immigration if they had been successful in this election. And I also think that a big factor in their demise will be the sort of spoiler role played by the third party, which is in this case, the Reform UK Party.
And what's your read on Nigel Farage deciding to jump into this election?
Well, with Nigel Farage, I think there's a lot of red flags about him. There's no smoking gun, but there's lots of red flags. He's a very suspicious character. And it looks like he got orders from Moscow to, revive this sort of dissident project. And it seems to have had some effect if the polls are to be believed. But of course, we don't really know if the polls will pan out quite as we expect. This is something of an outlier. So the pollsters could be quite wrong in a number of ways, but it definitely looks like the Conservative Party isn't going to do very well. And a big part of that will be Nigel Farage's Reform UK. So it looks like Reform UK won't achieve very much. They might succeed in getting 1 or 2 seats, possibly slightly more, but they'll just disappear after that. The Conservative Party will probably shrink to between like 150 to 170 seats. And there'll be quite a weak opposition to a Labour Party that will then benefit from the divisions of their opposition. And the Labour Party will be getting probably less votes than under Jeremy Corbyn, but a lot more seats.
Now, it seems like both Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak probably have about 40 IQ points on Joe Biden. They probably have about 20 IQ points on Donald Trump. It seems like the average British politician has 15 IQ points on his American counterpart. Do you agree with that rough guess of a cognitive difference between British politicians and American politicians? And then do you agree with my analysis that it doesn't seem to create more effective government?
Well, I don't think you can directly compare Britain and America. Britain and America occupy quite different situations, and are on the end of quite different histories. So the challenges of ruling one are certainly not equal to the challenges of ruling the other. And you can take your pick there. The British politicians might sound more intelligent, but that's just because of the fancy way they talk. So it's very hard to evaluate their IQ. Of course, with Joe Biden, we're not really evaluating his IQ so much as his PQ, his Parkinson's quotient.
And what do you make of the rise of the National Front in France?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is something that's been on the cards for quite some time. And I think Macron was kind of brought in as a spoiler. And that he was very much a kind of, at the time, I thought he was very much a kind of astroturfed candidate. He was somebody who was kind of patched together in some back room in order to frustrate the National Rally's ascendancy to a degree of power. And he was, I guess, successful in doing that. But the sort of Macron project has kind of run out of road now, it seems. And, he's sort of going to done a Theresa May. Because I don't know, I mean, this might be too much detail for your listeners, but back in 2017, when Theresa May, back in 2016, when Theresa May succeeded David Cameron as Tory Prime Minister in the wake of Brexit, she had quite a narrow majority, and her big plan was to hold an election. And, she was running 20 points ahead of Labour at the time. And she thought, if I run an election now, I'll be able to boost my majority and strengthen my grip on power. And that will put me in a much better position with regard to the Brexit negotiations. But she made some unfortunate mistakes, which in her case, this was trying to tax people's property in order to pay for a boost in social care for elder people. And this was soon characterized as a kind of death tax, sort of taxing people's houses after they died, and people wouldn't be able to pass their property on to their children and so on. And this alienated a lot of the older voters. And so she sort of barely survived against Jeremy Corbyn by the skin of her teeth. And I think Macron kind of did that in France. He looked at the finances and he realized that, they couldn't afford all these generous retirement benefits for French boomers. And so he raised the retirement age, I think, up to 67. And that upset a lot of older people as well. And so that made Macron a lot less popular than he otherwise might have been. So it's not exactly effective politics to alienate the boomer.
So as I've gotten older, I've noticed a decline in mental quickness, a decline in my short-term memory. I often have to struggle to remember words or elementary facts. Have you noticed any change in your cognitive powers as you age?
Not really, because as I age, I kind of structure what I know about the world much more effectively. And so I effectively boost my IQ, almost every year as I get older. So it's brilliant.
Dominic Cummings, former advisor to British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Any thoughts on Dominic?
Not really. No, he's just I don't really follow his content, but and he I think his moment came and went with Bojo.
Okay, and what's going on in Japanese politics?
Japanese politics is Japanese people are where they're where British people will probably be in 20 years, which is completely depoliticized. I think this is going to be, in some respects, quite a depoliticizing election. And Japanese people, they don't take politics at all as seriously as people do in the West. They had a moment, I don't know, when was that? About 20 years ago, where the grip of the the LDP was challenged for a short time, and they tried prime ministers from other parties. That proved to be very disappointing. It didn't really change much or go anywhere. And so they basically just switched back to the LDP. What I have noticed, however, is that there's a lot more women coming into politics. And I think there's going to be an election in Tokyo for the governor between a couple of women. But it's all very cosmetic and superficial, that sort of aspect of politics.
How has the rise of China affected Japanese politics? It seems like Japan's doing a lot more to fund its military and to arm itself against the rise of China.
Yeah, that was mainly prompted by America electing Trump. They thought, oh, God, we can't rely on the Americans anymore. And then by Putin invading the Ukraine, which suggested that, the rules of the game had changed somewhat. And so they decided that the time had come to boost their military spending. And so they are kind of reacting to events, so I think it's quite a logical and reasonable response. Japan, I think America will also continue to be a presence in the Pacific area, and of course, if America sort of withdraws to some degree from Europe, they'll have more resources to spend on Asia. But the problem America has is it lacks credibility as a superpower because it's not really willing to get its hands dirty. And I think this is something that the rivals to American power are becoming increasingly aware of, and it seems to be something that that Putin was aware of when he went into the Ukraine. And American power will work as long as it can find other countries willing to sort of do the die-in. And right now the Ukrainians are quite willing to fulfill that part of the coalition deal. And in Asia, there'll have to be a lot of calculations made by the various parties. So America's not really seen as a reliable coalition partner by a lot of countries now. The global system itself is increasingly under threat by this multipolarity and by the kind of weak center, which is America, and its sort of understandably isolationist tendencies. I mean, you can't really, you can't really blame some people for being attracted by this policy. I'm just saying that it has pros and cons. So what looks like a good deal to Americans, like withdrawing from the rest of the world, might seem like a good way to cut costs and so on, but there will be consequences. America does benefit from its global position and from this so-called global order, and if that collapses into chaos, that could come back home to affect America.
If let's say Putin takes all of Ukraine that he wants, how does that affect, if at all, the well-being of American citizens?
Well, look, Putin. Why does Putin need to take a part of Ukraine? The reason he needs to take a part of Ukraine is because he runs his society. He stifles other points of view. He stifles opposition. So he needs to be offering Russia something in return for giving up its liberty. And so it's a similar deal to the one that people like Adolf Hitler and Mussolini offered to their populations, like a lack of dissidence, a lack of freedom, a lack of opposition to the center in return for a increasing sense of importance and glory in the world. And so if Putin takes a slice off Ukraine, then probably a few years later he's going to have to come back for another slice, and then he'll have to come back for reasserting Russian interests in the Baltic states and so on. So there's something inherently destabilizing about Russia, and that has to be held in check at some line. And it's probably better if the line is closer to Moscow than further away from Moscow.
But reading between the lines, you're admitting that it wouldn't make any difference in the lives of American citizens, at least not immediately.
Well, I think it would, because it would affect the global economic picture. It would affect the European economies. Europe would have to switch to a more militaristic culture. Eventually, this would lead to a kind of multipolar world of increasingly authoritarian and militaristic powers. And then if America didn't play along with that, they would be in trouble too. America basically gets a lot of its resources, a lot of its products from overseas. So you can't really escape the global economy, especially an incredibly globalized country like America. It would also create all sorts of refugee flows, no doubt, things like that. So I can see it affecting America. Of course, America would be more sort of cushioned against all that, obviously, but it would definitely affect America.
Anything going on in the Middle East that has your attention these days?
Let's see. There's not really much going on at the moment, is there? I mean, it's pretty quiet, isn't it? The Middle East. It's a bit sleepy, I would say.
Well, you've got the Houthis cutting off traffic through the Suez Canal. We've got a war that's currently limited between Israel and Hezbollah, but could kick into high gear at any time. And we've got a highly unstable situation in the Middle East that at any time you would expect could become dramatically more intense.
Yeah. Well, I think I think those oil tankers are insured, so I wouldn't worry too much about them. Hezbollah, they like to have a few kind of pot shots at Israel and vice versa. Yeah, I don't really see anything happening yet. I mean, I think probably we should be looking at how long Netanyahu can survive. Not really sure what the strategy is. Not really sure. What do you think Netanyahu's strategy to win in Gaza is, Luke? Because I'm obviously, as a conversion to the Jews, you're probably very interested in this question.
Yeah, I am very interested in the question. I think he understands that Israel needs to maintain complete military access to any part of Gaza. So essentially, he understands that Israel has to take on the security management of Gaza, and this might last indefinitely, which is obviously not an ideal situation, but I think he recognizes it as inevitable. I think I find it most interesting. The situation I find most interesting is that Israel seems to be eager to go to war with Hezbollah, and Hezbollah does not want to go to war with Israel. And I think it's interesting that Israel wants to go to war with Iran, and Iran does not want to go to war with Israel. So I may be completely off, but that's my read of the most important developments in the Middle East that I've gained from reading people such as Graham Wood in The Atlantic.
Yeah, well, my impression is that Israel is just gaining increasing unpopularity without really achieving anything solid in return. I mean, if you compare Israel to, say, Putin, Putin has gained a lot of unpopularity in the world, but he's sort of gained a little bit of land in the Ukraine and a couple of bits of Georgia. You know what I mean? So he's got something out of it, you could say, depending on how the whole thing ends. With Netanyahu, he's in the West Bank. He's in Gaza. A lot of people are very upset. People are dying every day. This is getting reported in the West and elsewhere. A lot of people are getting alienated from the state of Israel. They're comparing it to apartheid South Africa and Nazi Germany. And so it's becoming more and more unpopular. But there's no solid territorial geopolitical strategic gains coming out of this. So, yeah, maybe the Iranians and the leaders of Hezbollah are quite intelligent, subtle actors. They're playing the long game.
And have you been reading any good books lately?
Oh yeah, one or two. Have you heard of Politics on the Edge by Rory Stewart?
Yes.
That's quite a readable book, quite an interesting book. It sort of really exposes a lot of things about the way democracies work, and how kind of fake they are, deep down, how kind of hollowed out they are, and how much is left to kind of permanent civil servants, how ineffectual politicians can be, how petty-minded voters are, all these kind of things. And he's actually quite a centrist, pro-democratic type of guy. But it's sort of interesting that the book he's written, it's almost more effective at demolishing our democratic paradigm than any propaganda the Russians or the Chinese could come up with.
How do you think other countries might react to Joe Biden's obvious cognitive decline? Do you think they might feel more free to be aggressive?
I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. I don't think they're that naive. I don't think they're going to assume that Joe Biden is actually the guy pushing all the buttons. It sort of makes, it does add to the degree of confusion that people perceive in America. I mean, certain countries have read America, and they've come to certain conclusions that yes, we can destabilize America if we keep it below the radar. We can, throw a few curveballs at America. We can stir things up. So there are certain weaknesses that our relatively open democratic societies have, and they have been, I think, fully exploited in the last few years. And I think they will continue to do that unless we evolve some kind of resistance to that. So it's kind of interesting to see Julian Assange come to a deal with America. They didn't really get what they wanted there. Julian Assange was part of an operation really to kind of by the Russians to hack important government people's emails and use and weaponize that in a US election. And the Americans wanted to try and exact some sort of revenge for that. But at the end of the day, it looks like they didn't really get away with much there. They didn't really get much revenge.
So I often have contempt for the trite level of analysis by most right-wing pundits, and I think you share my contempt, and you've written a thoughtful essay analyzing Matt Goodwin, who is a big deal in British right-wing politics, punditry. Any thoughts on Matt Goodwin? He's an academic who you would hope would have been more thoughtful than the less educated pundits?
Yes and no. I mean, pundits have to sell something, and they have to, and rather than analyze things, they kind of analyze what their readers want, and then end up giving it to them in many cases. Especially if that's their way of making a living. I think if it's not your way of making a living, you're a bit more disinterested and you're more likely to be objective. I mean, Matt Goodwin's analysis is that the woke elites, this is a way of social signaling. Like, the more woke you are, the more cool or high status you appear to be. And this is just a ludicrous thesis.
Who are right-wing pundits that have your respect, or public intellectuals?
Oh God, you put me on the spot now, Luke. No, well, I like the Luke Ford show, to be honest. I like the SJJ show. I think that's a good show.
Yes.
So yeah, I've got my favourites. I won't deny it. Like well-known, university accredited. Nah, most of them seem a bit phony to me.
Yeah, SJJ has a gift. He has a gift for common sense and for reading people. How would you articulate the gift of Stephen J. James?
Well, I think it's a kind of high-functioning, low-level autism, and it just it sort of like hits gold, on a regular basis.
Yeah, he's got something. He is intelligent. He's got his own way of reading reality. That which often you hear a point that he makes. He goes, "Oh yeah, that's obvious," and I didn't see it until I heard him articulate that. Anything going on with the leaders of what used to be known as the alt-right? Anything you've noticed from Nick Fuentes or Milo Yiannopoulos or Richard Spencer or Mike Enoch or any of that crowd?
Not in the last couple of weeks, anyway. I sometimes, look into them and see how they're doing. I think they've kind of, by and by, they've kind of faded from the scene. A lot of them. Obviously, Nick Fuentes hasn't. He's still very much in the mix, but he's kind of boring. He's this Christian nationalism, yada yada, Jews this, Jews that, yada yada yada. It's kind of boring now. All this kind of Groyper stuff, all this Bronze Age pervert stuff, all these little petty alt-right cults, sort of like seem to be disappearing up their own arses, to be honest.
What's your perspective on Bronze Age pervert, who I believe is a man of Romanian ancestry who did a PhD, I believe, in politics at an elite university, and then achieved considerable acclaim online? Any thoughts on Bronze Age pervert?
Well, it's just Nietzsche and baby talk. It's just rubbish. It's the sort of garbage that you can't believe it actually, became a bit of a hit with people. So it must be some sort of weird psyop by somebody. It's just, I'd rather not discuss something as kind of low tier as that.
What about the character named Academic Agent?
Yeah, I've sort of analysed him in my Who's Who of the Dissident Right. Again, yeah, I just think his analysis is complete garbage, such as it is. Don't really have much more to add than I've already, expressed in my Who's Who in the Dissident Right article on him.
Okay, so he's of Iranian heritage, I believe. Anything going on with Millennial Woes that you're aware of?
Well, all these people, they all fit into certain categories. Like Millennial Woes, to a certain degree, he fits into the same category as academic agent, they're both what I classify as sub-whites, and therefore they're attracted to this sort of kind of essentially neo-Nazi or pseudo-neo-Nazi way of the world, and they want to attain whiteness through radical right-wing identitarianism, and that's their kind of way to fit in, So if you look at it, if you look at the dissident right, the alt-right in general, you'll find that a lot of them are basically sub-whites or quasi-whites. I think I prefer that term, or sub-masculines, or manlets. So there's always something psychological going on with most members of the dissident right. That's what I've noticed anyway.
And Matt Forney, any read on Matt Forney?
Yeah, I kind of miss Matt Forney because I always thought he was an entertaining writer. I quite liked his podcasts. He was very much involved with Daniel Freeberg. And, Daniel Freeberg, I've always thought he's a bit of a suspicious character as well. Some people used to say that Matt Forney was a ghostwriter for the Daily Stormer. And yeah, sometimes stylistically, I could see some of that. But there's no clear proof of that. So that's just a rumor, But yeah, I'd like to see Matt Forney make more content. I don't think his Terror House project is doing anything particularly useful or important. He seems to be afraid to come back to the United States, though. Is he still in Mexico?
I have no idea. And anything going on with Richard Spencer? He's very active. He's got a Substack. He's continually producing content.
Yeah. What is he? What is his content now? Is it this Apollonianism? Is it?
Yeah, it's his new religion.
Yeah. Well, Richard, he's an odd one, isn't he? What I've noticed is that a lot of the foot soldiers at Charlottesville have been prosecuted, driven to suicide, whatever. But Richard has remained miraculously untouched, unprosecuted. So I've always thought that's a bit odd.
Yeah. Not just that, but I remember a Southern Poverty Law Center researcher and quite equivalently an Antifa leftist activist said, leave Richard alone. I remember that on a podcast that effectively people on the left believe that Richard Spencer is now doing the work of God.
Yeah, I ran a story on that. So yeah, I definitely heard that, and I thought, what the fuck is that? So yeah, there are a few red flags surrounding Richard too, let's say.
And what do you make of Milo Yiannopoulos giving up homosexuality?
LOL, yeah, sure. I mean, has he? Is there any proof that he's stopped being gay?
No, it's just something he talks about a lot.
Yeah, I don't know. What did I say earlier about all these old alt-right people disappearing up their own arses? Milo Yiannopoulos is probably another one.
And Charles Johnson, who an eccentric character on the fringes of the dissident right, who's friends with Matt Gaetz. And any thoughts on Chuck Johnson?
No, I'm going to have to leave, Lou, because all these names, as soon as you mention them, I have to stifle laughter, and I just have to bite my tongue. It's just the names themselves are hilarious to me.
Okay, great to talk to you, Colin. Thanks for coming by.
Okay, right. Nice talking to you, Luke. Cheers.
Okay, cheers, mate. All right, let's see if Bari Weiss can give us an interesting conversation with Axios national political correspondent Alex Thompson.
Nights. Cozy Earth's bedding is crafted with
Oh,
cutting
come on.
edge sleepwear. Go to
What's happening on the Hill?
story dropping about President Biden, and you are personally breaking many of them. This episode is going to come out a few hours from now, but we're sitting down, and right now it's 5:30, right around 5:30 Eastern on July 3rd. And I'd love for you to just drop us into the moment. Where are we right now? The headline I read just before I came into the studio was one in which Biden was saying absolutely no way he's going to drop out. So what's going on?
I mean, on the macro level, you basically have a White House in crisis, right? I mean, this was a White House that for the last 3.5 years has been sort of, infamous for its, I guess, like, quote unquote, lack of drama, or at least lack of reported drama. And I have never been able to get angry quotes from White House officials easier than I have the last 3 days. People are angry. They don't know what is going on. And basically, so today is Wednesday. This was the first day that you really saw the White House jump into action to stop the bleeding. Now, the real question is, what took them so long? Everyone knew the debate was a disaster on Thursday night, but Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, they didn't do anything. I mean, like Biden, I hope, Biden on Sunday was doing Annie Leibovitz photo shoot at Camp David with his family. He has still not spoken to reporters since the debate. He's basically done 3 teleprompter remarks. And today was the first day where you finally saw the senior leadership of Biden world try to reassure. I mean, you've seen them try to reassure donors and sort of the cable news talkers and their surrogates. But this was the first day where they finally realized they have a real problem internally on their own staff. There is a confusion, like a lack of morale that is quickly spreading through the White House and the campaign, in part because some of these people were as shocked as the country was when they watched the debate on Thursday.
How is that possible? How are they shocked? Because my understanding is that everyone knew, meaning anyone with eyeballs to see, watched these clips of Biden that had dripped out over the past few weeks and months, and really beyond that, like watched as he has faded somewhat over the past years. And it seems so clear that the reason to sort of keep him largely out of the public eye, and that the spin, of course, was insisting that he was totally there, but that he so obviously wasn't. So I guess I'm wondering, like, if that's actually true, or if that's a convenient thing that these people are now telling reporters as a way of covering their ass.
Completely fair question. These people that I'm talking about, they're sort of, 1 or 2 or 3 rings out from the inner circle.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll explain it in two ways. One is, the thing that you have to understand about the Biden culture is, in some ways, it's still very much like a Senate office. There's really only like 10, maximum 20 people that he is interacting with on a consistent day-to-day level. They have really relegated the consistent access to him, including not just among Democratic lawmakers, but people inside the White House as well. So, to give you one example, there was a White House official that I had talked to that, had noticed sort of a senior moment when he interacted with him. Essentially, Biden asked to call a congressman's mom. And then he was reminded, well, you already called her like 2 weeks ago. Right. And this person was like, oh, that's sort of weird. Like, but, he had only seen him a few times. And, in isolation, you can excuse it. Right. It's just like a normal brain fart. You can sort of excuse it away. So there is definitely a core. And this is really the question. This is where you could potentially get into like scandal territory is, these 20 people, 10 to 20 people that were seeing him on a consistent basis. Did they ever see? But the people outside of it, they didn't see him on a consistent level. And they were basically trusting the people up top. And some of this was by design of just, sort of isolating Biden and keeping this sort of protective cone around him. And some of it actually were habits that were learned or introduced during COVID. And so when you enter the White House, some of those habits of keeping that very tight cocoon were never changed. So that's the first part. The second part is, sometimes I think there was this, I know there is this belief that the Biden is senile thing was a caricature that the right wing started back in 2019, back in 2020, well before Biden had really precipitously started struggling that we've seen, especially over the last year.
Yeah, Biden was checked out and struggling from 2018 on, as Mark Halperin reports.
And so there was this sort of, I think Democratic Party blue jersey team thing where like anything about the age was just
was right-wing
faith.
Misinformation.
Yes, a bad faith, like a right-wing thing, and they did not recognize that maybe what started out as more bad faith eventually started becoming increasingly true, and that's why the debate sort of finally shattered any of that illusion.
I want to talk about the way journalists covered this in a second and why the most obvious story in the world seemed to be so uncovered until it now has sort of exploded into view. But let's stay for just a second on what's happening right now, because if you read different headlines, you get very different pictures. Biden's press secretary just said an hour ago he's clear-eyed and he's staying in the race. He's absolutely not withdrawing. Biden said today, I'm running. No one's pushing me out. I'm not leaving. I'm in this race to the end and we're going to win. And yet, if you go to the New York Times homepage this morning, the headline was, Biden told ally that he's weighing whether to continue in the race. Help explain that chasm to us. Are there sort of different factions in the inner circle around him? Is the Biden ally leaking to the Times Kamala Harris herself? Like, bring us into the sort of palace intrigue a little bit more, if you would.
I have no idea what that was Katie Rogers, New York Times. I don't have any idea what her sourcing was. What my sourcing is basically that Biden recognizes that this is finally, I don't know if he recognized it the first 72 hours, but Biden does recognize now that this is a potentially existential event, that this could be the end of his presidency. And I think in conversations, he has basically expressed that he knows that the next week is critical.
Yeah, that's significant. It's finally getting through to Biden that he'll have to perform within the next week or step down.
And so now you're finally seeing him out there saying, yes, I'm in it. But like the thing is that like there was a vacuum for those 5 days and people were wondering, like, is it over? We don't know. Like, is he okay? And, so I think it's a combination. He's telling people, listen, I know that there's risk. I know that like this could be the end, but like I'm going to fight. And like this is him finally sort of like belatedly like getting into gear and stopping the internal bleeding.
How long would you be A-OK with having a senile president of the United States? I would suspect most Americans would want Joe Biden to resign immediately.
There was a really weird thing that happened, which is the debate happened. All of us were sort of slack-jawed and in shock. Even those of us who thought it was going to be bad, it was like 1,000 times worse. And when I went to bed at like 3 a.m. PST that night, I thought like this is over. Like this is going to be done in the next 24 hours.
So Kamala Harris as president of the United States will move in a more left-wing direction, but I would still prefer her as president because she seems to be mentally there. She seems to have effectively an additional 20 to 30 IQ points on where Joe Biden is at now.
48 hours. But what was so strange was this sort of, you had Axelrod, you had Obama, you had the Clintons, you had all of these people sort of coming out in full force saying, he's staying in, we're behind him. Tell us about like the lag. Like what accounts for that silence over the 4 to 5 days? What was the White House thinking? Why was that, in their view, sort of strategically smart to stay quiet for that long?
Oh, I think you're maybe giving them too much credit here. I don't know if this was as much strategy as it was, this is a White House in chaos.
Yeah, I agree with that analysis that we often attribute strategy when really what's going on is people doing the best they can in a chaotic circumstance.
Complete turmoil right now. And, the Biden circle was already small and it's become, in the face of crisis, even smaller. And I think there was incredibly, my reporting suggests that there was not an immediate recognition among the Biden inner circle of how serious the fallout was from the debate. And they have only sort of finally come to recognize it, a few days later.
Well, you had an unbelievably memorable headline in Axios yesterday, which was we're not on cable, so I can say this, freaking the fuck out, turmoil in the White House over Biden. Break it down a little bit for us. My understanding is that Jill Biden is really the force here. She is the one urging him to stay in the race, along with his son, Hunter, who apparently is joining now for all of these meetings. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. Are there any forces first of all, is that accurate? And second of all, are there any key figures in that inner circle urging him to step down?
I am not aware of any key figures in the inner circle urging him to step down.
So Glenn Greenwald has a gift for summing things up. He says somehow the vast majority of Americans knew and said so in poll after poll, year after year, that Joe Biden was in cognitive decline and lacked the capacity to do the job of president. The only ones who didn't know were the media, who were kept in the dark and thus feel betrayed. And so we've got a reporter here from CNN, Jill Filipovic. Part of the Biden must go story has been huge because many commentators, voters, and members of the press feel angry and betrayed. We largely trusted Biden's team when they insisted he was fine. Why would you trust Biden's team insisting he was fine when the evidence right in front of you was that he was not fine? The debate made clear he's not fine. Many of us felt some combination of pity for Biden and fear for the future. Now I think there's rising resentment at being had. The Biden team could do a full weekend at Bernie's, or they could send 3 toddlers in a trench coat to the next debate, and I'll still vote for Joe Biden over Donald Trump. Journalists have looked into the question of how Biden's age is impacting his abilities, reported on how voters are worried about it. They've been accused of making up a non-issue, of being ableist, of facilitating a Trump win. Biden's team has made him available for fewer interviews than any president since Reagan. I think some journalists learned the lesson of the but her emails disaster with regard to Hillary Clinton and have tried to moderate on the age question, looking more deeply at the existential threat that Donald Trump poses. Now the age issue is fully out in the open and undeniable. So in other words, if you don't like the Republican candidate, it's acceptable to you as a journalist to ignore or downplay issues which are obvious and of great importance to the American people. Are you sure that you are in the right profession?
It's possible they are, but I would be surprised. Sort of within the very inner core of Biden world, there is at times there is a fierce culture of loyalty, which is one of the reasons why there have been so few leaks. But the potential negative consequence of that culture is that if you raise potential problems, sometimes you can be labeled as disloyal, which again is, I think, part of the reason why they were a little bit slow to realize the severity of the fallout. Now, in terms of the family dynamic, so Valerie Biden, Biden's sister, who's been part of his campaigns forever, has wrote in her book that even though Val didn't think Biden or was nervous about Biden running in 2020, that Jill was all in. Jill has also been all in 2024. There is certainly, it's interesting. People that have worked for Joe Biden for a long time, or used to work for him for a long time, or have known him for a long time, the opinions are a bit split. There is significant anger at Jill Biden among some of those people, feeling that there's no way she did not realize that his performance on Thursday was a possibility, but she let him go out there anyway and humiliate himself on the world stage. And there's fury at her not, looking after the legacy. Now, some also people feel that sort of the blame on Jill or even Hunter, is really taking some agency away from Joe Biden. He was the one. I mean, he's president. He chose to run. And honestly, the only reason why that debate happened last Thursday is because Joe Biden wanted to debate. He made it very clear to his advisors early on that he wanted to debate. And, some of this was ego. Some of this was clearly not seeing himself that clearly. Joe Biden has long sort of had a little bit of age denialism, even before he was 81. And he thought mano a mano on the same stage with Trump, that this was going to happen. And, some advisors didn't think that was going to be a great idea, but the president wants it, so they made it happen, and we all saw the results.
Alex, you're probably going to say that this is way overthinking it and, don't give them so much credit. But I have to ask, just because this is an idea that's getting floated around among many smart people on places like Twitter. And they're basically saying this was all intentional. In other words, everyone around Biden knew what a shit show this debate was going to be. But they purposefully asked for it to be early enough ahead of the convention so that he would go on stage, humiliate himself, and there would be no other option for him other than to step aside, which now that question obviously hangs in the balance. What do you make of that argument that this was sort of a setup and a way to get Biden off stage so that they could replace him with a more electable candidate?
Listen, if I ever get the reporting to confirm that, I think I will win some sort of awards. But I don't have, listen, I never say like nothing, I never discount anything as possibly being true, but I don't have any reporting so far to suggest anything like that. Now, what I'll tell you in terms of what my reporting showed is the reason they asked for it early was twofold. The stated reason was that they were like, we're behind the polls. This will finally let voters clue into the fact that Donald Trump is actually going to be the nominee. And finally, like, Trump polarization will activate and Democrats will finally just resigningly go back to Joe Biden. The not stated reason why they scheduled it so early is because it was a hedge. Like, if you are Joe Biden's staffer and he's saying, I want to debate, even if you don't think it's a good idea, what's the most risk-averse way that you can plan the debate? It is to have it as early as possible, so that way you have 4 months to recover. Unlike in 1980 with Carter Reagan, where they had the last debate, the one debate the week before the election, and then Reagan cleans Carter's clock, and then it's a landslide. That was, my reporting suggests that was the motivation behind the early debate. And I can tell you, people at Debate Prep were calling people the day of the debate, and they basically were like, Debate Prep went fine, B-, he was fine, but they basically were like, it'll be okay. And they were shocked. I mean, some of them at least say they were shocked, because even if he had moments like that in other settings, he hadn't.
So I often have all these topics that I want to talk about, and they just spontaneously come to me in the minutes before I press go on my computer for a live stream. And then the cognitive demand of operating OBS and checking the audio levels and checking the video and monitoring the chat, my cognitive capacity starts steadily shrinking down. And then sometimes if I encounter enough, for example, technical hurdles, I get so tense and so pulled down that my ability to expand and to talk freely has just been removed. And so once you step onto a debate stage, or once you step into any situation that is high pressure, you're going to feel that pressure. You're going to feel a tightening and a compression that comes along with diminishing your possibilities. And so you can do decent debate prep, but then under the pressure of the circumstance, all your possibilities will be removed from you. I've felt that often with live streaming, or I'll be excited to do a live stream and then just run out of energy. I typically start losing energy and enthusiasm within 20 minutes, 40 minutes, and it then starts steadily dropping. I start playing more and more bits from other people. I start contributing less and less. So I can identify what happened with Joe Biden in this debate. I felt the cognitive decline myself.
Had moments like that in the debate prep.
Help us get into the minds of those, like maybe Jill Biden or maybe the president himself, that are saying we can win. Not only are we going to stay in the race, we can win the presidency. Is it coming from a sincere belief that he is the only man is.
So Joe Biden attacks Donald Trump for assaulting women, and one Philadelphia sports personality was banned from Philadelphia Stadium because he planted an unwanted kiss on a woman, right? 95% of the time, if there's going to be a sexual or physical interaction between a man and a woman, a man has to lead. He's not always going to read cues appropriately. So I think every man has experience making a pass at a woman and being a woman and being rejected. So what some people would consider a pass, right, in a different time and circumstance is going to be considered assault. All right, planting an unwanted kiss on someone is now more likely to be termed assault than what we would say 20 years ago.
As you know, this was sort of the unofficial campaign slogan in 2020, that he is the only person that can defeat Trump, or is it something more craven? You know, and I can't help but think of the cover of Vogue where you have Jill Biden in this really beautiful white tuxedo dress. If people haven't checked it out, she looks great. But the pull quote is like, "We will decide our future." And you kind of take a step back and you're like, but aren't you public servants? Isn't the goal for us to decide your future? So help us understand, Alex, like, you've done so much reporting on this family and on this White House. What is driving their desire to stay in the race? Because you could imagine that if you care about your legacy and you care about, you know, the legacy of Biden being, as he would put it, you know, I saved democracy from Donald Trump. You could imagine that logic being extended to, I'm now going to step aside to make room for a younger candidate that can defeat Donald Trump and save democracy. So what's going on in their minds?
Okay, so separate those out. First of all, the tuxedo dress that Jill Biden was wearing cost $4,990, so I hope it looked good. And it definitely created a lot of feelings among many Biden staffers to see that cover out there. I asked Jill Biden's office. Obviously, they'd planned this like months in advance, but I asked her office. I was like, did you ask them if maybe you could delay the digital publishing of this cover story like a week? You know, like, and they just didn't answer. And the reason I sort of hone in on that, I think you were right to hone in on that, is it did make some people question their motives.
Yeah.
You know, Jill Biden, for most of their marriage and most of his political career, was a very reluctant political spouse. And she has emerged, especially the last 2 years, and especially just the last 2 weeks, as an incredibly enthusiastic spouse. You know, and in the Vogue covers, you know, she's had 3 Vogue covers in 4 years. That's as many as Michelle Obama had in 8. And, you know, 3 more than Melania Trump ever had. So, you know, there is some questioning within Biden world on the motives. Like, do they like the life? You know, I think is sort of key to your question. Like, are they basically, you know, convincing themselves they're the only ones that can beat Trump?
Right. You can't seriously make the case that Joe Biden staying in office is a public service. Clearly, it's a selfish, destructive act. It greatly endangers the best interests of the United States of America.
Because they like the life. And there, you know, I haven't talked to them. I don't know the answer, but there are definitely some people within the Biden orbit that, especially after that Vogue cover and the Annie Leibovitz photo shoot and just in general, sort of like, you know, her being so gung-ho on the reelection that have wondered that. On the other question, I mean, there is a compelling case to be made, believe it or not. Like, I have not heard a compelling case that Joe Biden would be mentally fit to serve as president in 2028, which is what he's trying to do. I have heard a compelling case that Joe Biden can still actually win this election, because there are tens of millions of people in this country that would vote for Joe Biden at 110 years old over Donald Trump. That is sort of
Right. I would vote for a Republican at 110 years of age over a Democrat.
the nature of the Trump polarization effect. And so you could see how they would still convince themselves that they can still win this race. He's beat him before. And, you know, Kamala Harris isn't as popular. But, you know, this whole, I actually think that like some of the Kamala Harris discourse has actually been a little unfair to her, or at least like a little bit too not critical of Biden, because the Biden folks are like, well, she can't win. And it's like, you picked her. I mean, like he could, like if you know, that was your choice. So I don't think. Anyway, that's a very long word vomit answer.
Well, let's talk about Kamala. Actually, it's a perfect transition. Let's say he were to drop out of the race. Could do it, by the way, could hand her the presidency now also. But let's decide let's not go there. Let's just decide he decides to drop out of the race. Would Kamala be the nominee in that case? What are you hearing from your sources? Where does she fit into all of this? And what does she want? Because anytime I'm seeing a negative leak, I'm thinking,
man, when did I lose Luke Croft? He was a regular in the chat.
Is this Kamala Harris or people around her? Obviously.
It's interesting. I think Kamala Harris is basically hugging Joe Biden as tightly as possible because she knows that if he withdraws and says that the path of least resistance for the Democratic Party, the least messy thing to do is make her the nominee. Then she makes, she finds some sort of Midwestern white guy as her like running mate, Josh Shapiro, or you take like, astronaut Senator Mark Kelly, and then you just go forward from there and you avoid this like incredible, messy convention fight. I guess I would say like if Joe Biden were to withdraw from the race tomorrow, she has the inside track. It would not be a given. Even if Joe Biden says, I want my delegates to vote for her, they are not obligated to vote for her. So she would be the overwhelming favorite. It's also unclear who would challenge her, but like, does someone go for it and just dare and take their chance? But she would be the overwhelming favorite, in part because I think people don't want a messy process, given, Trump has been the great Democratic unifier in a lot of ways. And I think she would not be given it. She would have to overcome some hurdles.
Steve Saylor makes the point the Democratic Party has become a coalition of the fringe, and the only thing that holds these various fringes together, such as LGBTQ communities, blacks, Chinese Americans, the only thing that holds them all together is hatred of the white Christian core of the country.
Okay, let's talk about the broader picture in the Democratic Party right now, because a lot of the sort of noise is not just happening from these leaks that are coming from the White House, but they're happening from the party itself. There was a Bloomberg headline today that I read, and perhaps you've had access to this letter, that talked about a number of House Democrats circulating a letter, and it said dozens of them were looking at this letter demanding that Biden withdraw from the race. First of all, have you seen that letter?
I haven't.
What do you know about it?
I mean, I know that there are tons of conversations. I mean, like, if you want to use the metaphor of the
All right, this is Alex Thompson talking to Bari Weiss. Alex Thompson tweeted July 2nd, many current and former Biden advisors are very confused and frustrated as to why Biden hasn't done a single interview or taken questions since the disastrous debate, and he's now waiting several more days until one airs on Friday. And Jill Filipovic responds, the easiest way to demonstrate that the debate was just a bad night would be to have Biden out there speaking off the cuff to the press and the public. The fact that they have not done this suggests that they aren't confident that Joe Biden can pull it off.
Dam breaking. The dam is not broken, but every single hour there are more cracks in it. And there are some Democrats that feel that they would rather jump all together than just one at a time. And then you don't just have a crack, you have a fissure. And there are definitely those conversations going on right now. And again, it goes beyond, at this point, a lot of those House Democrats, like, it is actually, like, it's not even for them, for some of them, it's not even really about stopping Trump. I mean, they don't want Trump to win. But at this point, they're worried about Joe Biden hurting them and costing them, like, there is a real possibility.
I mean, look at Bob Casey. That's my home state of Pennsylvania, right? Senator Bob Casey. Dave McCormick, who's running against him, is already cutting ads of Bob Casey insisting that Biden's completely there. He's sharp as a tack. He's basically doing handstands. And the ad is unbelievably compelling because it basically says Bob Casey knew and lied to you.
And every single one of those incumbents is going to have to answer for that. And like beyond just like the incumbents, I mean, there's like we haven't even really gotten through the weeds here of the initial sort of like crisis to really probe people that kept insisting publicly that he was completely there all the time and asked them to answer for it. And, it's going to be a theme the entire election, even if.
Right. Nate Cohn is the New York Times specialist with regard to polls. He says it's hard to see signs of Democratic weakness outside of the polling on Joe Biden. So whether it's special election results, the midterms, or the polling of other Democrats, the problem appears to be contained to Biden.
Biden is not the nominee. So, yeah, I mean, at this point, there's like a self-preservation going on among Democrats beyond just stopping Trump from winning.
By the time this conversation airs tonight, Biden will be holding a meeting, a call with Democratic governors. What do you know about that? And what's the message, not just in that call, but more generally, that he's going with? Because frankly, there have been just a series of excuses, spin, justifications, explanations that have happened since Thursday night, ranging from he had a cold, he had a bad night, okay, I'm good, but I'm only good between 10 and 4, as you reported. What's the latest talking point? What is Biden and the White House more generally, how are they selling this to people at this point? Because to me, it's like a boat that has 10,000 holes in it, and they're just trying to put their fingers in all of them and stop the flooding.
It's just fascinating to see this war on reality mounted by the Biden administration.
Yeah, I mean, you forgot the other excuse, which is that he was like traveling across the world. And,
right,
like,
of course.
But even though he had been back in the United States for like 12 days before the debate started, and he was down basically at Camp David with no public events for the entire week before the debate. So the excuses, also, you notice that like Joe Biden really has never even said that he had a cold. And that was only something that they told reporters about an hour into the debate. So they are all over the place with trying to explain what happened in that debate. And I think the reason part of that is because there is confusion, there's disorganization, there is infighting over the fallout. But also, I think ultimately, there is no good explanation. It is not solved by messaging. It just is.
There have been so many sort of delicious reports out about donors sort of frantically calling each other, texting each other between Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, all the way to the Hamptons and Aspen, freaking out. You see like a lot of boldface names mentioned in these stories. There was a detail about Rob Reiner in Los Angeles screaming at a television and Jane Fonda on the couch with tears in her eyes. What do you know about how these donors, especially these...
Right. If Democratic Party politics is a major part of your life, right, how would you maintain enthusiasm and optimism and courage and strength right now? It just must be incredibly debilitating to have Joe Biden as your leader.
Mega donors have been reacting since Biden's performance on Thursday night.
Right. I am not married. I don't have a family. And so I can largely lead my life as I want, with some major exceptions. I've got to have clients to earn a living. I want to maintain friendships, and I want to maintain my happiness and ease in the Orthodox Jewish community. So those considerations have a considerable effect on my behavior. But when you're representing an entire political party like the Democratic Party and the United States of America, right, you'd think that would restrain Joe Biden and make him think more deeply, am I operating in the best interests of the country? And the answer is obviously not.
Where do they sit right now?
It depends. There's definitely a constituency that's like steady as she goes. He's probably the nominee. We'll cut the check. It's not ideal, whatever. That being said, there is also a huge group of people that feel lied to, and they are pissed. There's no other way. They are so mad at the White House and all of the campaign aides and Biden validators that told them, oh, I know he's speaking from a teleprompter at his fundraisers. It's fine. I know he's repeated the same story.
And why are they so angry? Right? They don't want to be angry at themselves for the lack of journalistic diligence, for the lack of doing their reporting job. And so they want to offload their humiliation and their anger and their embarrassment and just point fingers at someone else. I mean, I think we all do this. We all want to gaslight when we're called out for bad behavior, when we are revealed to be engaged in something humiliating, we immediately want to point fingers and offload the blame at someone else. And so I think that is what drives the anger and humiliation on the part of the news media. The first human instinct is not to take responsibility for one's own bad behavior. The first human instinct is to blame someone else.
Word for word twice, a few minutes apart. It's fine. Like, there were people that were spending more time with Joe Biden that were telling these skeptical donors, he's great, he's fine, you like, don't believe your eyes. And they are mad.
Well, there was a great quote that I just read today from Ari Emanuel, the super agent heads WME, and he said, he gave us a bunch of malarkey and I'm really pissed. We should all be really pissed.
I mean, and the interesting thing is, as you know, Ari Emanuel's brother.
Right. If a politician gives you malarkey and you believe it, that's on you. Right? Politicians are the most transparent BS merchants that we have. So if you believe the lies that a politician is dishing out, that's on you. Why on earth would you take it as though it was 100% truth? All right. This is why lying is usually a consensual act. When I came out to Los Angeles and I started investigating jobs for an actor and model, I got taken in by all sorts of scams because I wanted to believe what they were selling me. I wanted to believe that I could be a major lead in a major motion picture, and I was willing to pay $150 to have that fantasy and to have my name appear in Variety magazine as the lead in this forthcoming motion picture.
Is Biden's ambassador to Japan, Rahm Emanuel, who worked with Joe Biden when he was chief of staff to Barack Obama. So I don't know for sure, but I have to imagine that he at least gave his brother a heads up that he was going to say that. And I think I know Ari Emanuel was speaking for a lot of donors. And this is the thing, is like, there's going to be some donors that just completely bail on Joe Biden, that are out, that don't want to get another call from Jeffrey Katzenberg talking about how everything's fine. And they're just out.
Is he still sticking to the everything's fine? Is he in the everything's fine camp, Katzenberg?
I have not spoken to Jeffrey since the debate, but I have not seen any sort of mea culpa. But they are frantically trying to get things back together. And like, I talked to a lot of people on the donor call that they convened. I think it was last night or the night before. I'm sort of lost track of dates. And the message was like, everything is still fine. Like, we know it's a bad night. It's a bad night. It's a bad night. Bad 24 hours. And so the bigger problem, though, for the Biden people is not really the donors that leave. I mean, it's bad. But the real problem is the donors that stay, but basically only give a fraction of what they were going to give.
Right.
And don't hustle and tell their friends and try to get checks from their friends.
Right. If you're not enthusiastic about what you're doing, if you're not energized, you're not going to do well at work. You need to have considerable physical stamina to do well at work, and you're going to feel stronger if you have good relations with other people. And so if the Biden campaign isn't able to develop enthusiasm from donors, right, that's going to be crippling. And if we aren't able to develop enthusiasm with the people in our life, all right, if they're not glad to have us around, that's going to be crippling for us. You're just not going to have the same strength, right? Your pains will be more intensely painful when you don't have social support. You will be more isolated. You will be more prone to depressed and neurotic thinking. All right, your joys won't be nearly as joyful when you don't have people to share them with.
And that's a potential crisis for the campaign.
Speaking of Rahm Emanuel and Obama, the Obama sort of wing of the Democratic Party is just such an important power center. And I wonder, how, if at all, are they sort of figuring into these discussions? Are they quietly reassuring people? Are they quietly telling people to put pressure on the Bidens? What do you know about them and their motivations?
I mean, I think, I know like Barack Obama has been like, well, that was worrying, but, but as someone that's like gone so deep into like the Biden-Obama relationship, the thing to understand, there's this, I think there is this concept out there, I've seen it on Twitter, that like Barack Obama is going to go to Joe Biden, be like, you can't do it, man. Now, that could happen, and it's possible it could work. But I can tell you, knowing their relationship, there is a strong possibility that that would completely backfire.
Right, The Economist magazine out of England says the presidential debate was awful for Joe Biden, but the cover-up has been worse. The dishonesty of his campaign provokes contempt. He must withdraw.
The only way you could really ensure that Joe Biden will stay in the race is having Barack Obama come and say you have to leave, because the Biden-Obama relationship in some ways in many ways has never been the same since 2015, when Biden felt that Obama chose Hillary over him. Now, Obama, people sort of dispute that, whatever, but Biden feels that way. And that cuts to your core as a person. And it's just, so, the Obamas are incredibly influential. I know there's also this halcyon dream of Michelle Obama. They're going to swap in Michelle Obama.
Most people have an exaggerated sense of their own physical and mental capability as they get older, right? Most people expect to work until at least age 65, and most people are simply physically incapable of doing that. So it's not like Joe Biden is an outlier in his overestimation of his own strength and cognitive abilities.
Michelle Obama hates politics. I mean, maybe somehow but she hates politics. But I did find it amusing. Reuters did poll her after the debate, and she was by far the most competitive Democrat. She trounced Trump by 11 points, 50 to 39%.
Alex, I don't know if you're a betting man or not. I've never gambled. But if you had to...
So I don't fear getting older to a neurotic degree. My father lived until age 90. Until his final, say, 2 months, he was still working away. But I remember my father was my age now. I am 58. So my father was born in 1929. So he was my age in 1987. So he was still physically vigorous. But within 6 years, he was considerably less vigorous, right? So my father used to typically rise about 4 a.m., but by about age 65, he was getting up closer to 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. His physical vitality diminished considerably between age 58 and 65.
Bet right now, July 3rd, Joe Biden drops out of the race versus stays in. What's your bet?
This is based on
your reporting.
Yeah. I'm just making it clear. I'm not predicting anything, but based on the reporting, I've heard it all. I mean, honestly, it's just it's even odds. It's 50-50.
Right. If you wait until age 70, you're going to get in Social Security payments about a third more than you'd get if you retire at age 65. But I don't remember all the details. I just remember seeing an in-depth article about how most people have an exaggerated sense of their own physical and cognitive capacity for work as they move through their 60s and older. Most people have to retire from work a lot earlier than they expected.
And I cannot believe that history could potentially hinge on a George Stephanopoulos interview, but this is where we are. We are in the Matrix. We are in.
So what makes Alex Thompson so fun to listen to is that he's young and irreverent.
Whatever creation of the machines that version of this timeline.
Alex, this is your World Series. This is I can tell from your eyes you've been up for days. Okay, let's say he does drop out, okay? Who is most likely to replace him on the ballot?
Kamala Harris.
Okay.
And then I think she would probably pick, some of the names. So I already mentioned Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro would be one. Arizona Senator Mark Kelly would be another person. North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper, who was a attorney general alongside Kamala Harris when she was AG. Those are a few of the names that.
So Joe Biden has told a gathering of Democratic governors that he needs to get more sleep and to work fewer hours. Now, if you have less sleep, it has a similar effect on you to being drunk. You tend to be less inhibited, you tend to be less disciplined, and you tend to consistently make worse choices.
and Andy Bashir, the Democratic governor of Kentucky.
I mean, I fairly regularly get up at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. And as long as I've had approximately 4 hours of sleep, I can be pretty functional and still do a show. But you will hear in my voice when I'm not getting enough sleep. I mean, you will see a difference in the quality of the show, the difference in my articulation. There is like much less strength available when you're not getting enough sleep. And you can do various voice techniques, but still the voice gives away who you are, right? It gives it away immediately. And if you just free up your intuition, getting a read on people based on their voice, you'll get an incisive understanding of where they're at.
Kentucky. Those are some of the parlor game among Democrats who these are people outside of the orbit, don't know what's going to happen. But the parlor game of who would Kamala pick as her VP has already begun.
Okay, just before I came in here, I saw that Jim Clyburn, a top ally of Joe Biden, told the press that if the president does step aside, he would want to see a, quote, mini primary ahead of the DNC. What does that mean exactly?
I don't know, and he doesn't know. I mean, like mini primary. I mean, it would be decided by a few thousand DNC delegates, and I guess maybe he's saying like maybe there should be a debate, maybe there should be sort of like a series of town halls, but we don't know what it would look like. But I do think Kamala Harris would definitely have at least one challenger. Now, is the challenger threatening enough that she would deign to debate them or do a town hall? That's sort of the.
Okay, here's the news story that I was thinking about. Came out April 26, 2024. CBS News. Planning on retiring at age 65. Most Americans retire far earlier and not by choice. American workers believe they will retire at 65, the nation's traditional retirement age, but real life often gets in the way. Majority step back from work far earlier, and for many, it's not by choice. The median retirement age for Americans is 62. The typical worker steps back from their career 5 years earlier than expected, right? There is a dramatic gap between retirement goals and reality. Right? There's an increasingly popular idea that Americans should work longer so they can better afford their golden years. The reality is many United States seniors are forced into retirement before they are ready, right? Many older people want to work longer. They're just not capable of doing it, right? You're just not going to be productive. 7 in 10 retirees stop working before they turned 65. Half said they stopped working before they had expected. The majority blame reasons out of their control, such as health and disability. Only 2 in 5 said they stopped working earlier than expected because they could afford to do so. So there is a big gap between expectations and reality with regard to your physical and cognitive strength. And work takes a tremendous amount of stamina, and people find as they move into their 60s, they just don't have it anymore.
Next question. But, it would be interesting. I think it would basically be a lot of television, TV town hall, debate sort of stuff for a mini primary.
You reported months ago about how several Democratic governors and senators have sort of been jockeying to boost their own national profiles and sort of waiting in the wings as potential Biden successors. People like Gretchen Whitmer, her name's getting mentioned a lot right now, Gavin Newsom with the shiny teeth, who would never think about running for the presidency. He protests so much. People like J.B. Pritzker, Ro Khanna, like any of those figure in or still?
Yeah. They're all gonna think about it. Josh Shapiro too, Roy Cooper, Phil Murphy, the New Jersey governor, Mark Kelly, the senator from Arizona that I mentioned before. It could be anyone. People have thrown this out there. I think it's very, very unlikely, but does Hillary Clinton be like, think about it?
Never say die. Never say die, Alex.
Yeah, just for a hot sec. Does she just think about it? It'll be open season. In the second Kamala stumbles, you would see the vacuum filled.
Unburdened by what has been, of course. So if Biden drops out, there's the question of the money. I think has like a $92 million war chest. Maybe it's $100 million now. What happens to that money? Does it just automatically go to Kamala Harris? How does it work?
This is where my understanding, and people that are listening should definitely triple check this, but my understanding of it is that, so there's two things going on. The 90 million figure that you're talking about is only the Biden-Harris figure. Now, they've been fundraising alongside the DNC. So the DNC also has its own huge stockpile of about like $100+ million. And that would go to whoever the nominee is. But the Biden-Harris money,
So Vladimir Putin has come out and says he supports Donald Trump's plan to end the war in Ukraine.
believe the only person that could get that money would be Kamala Harris. And if you want to transfer it to somebody else, you have to offer refunds, offer donors refunds, because it's like, well, you just gave to this you can't just transfer it to anybody. So yes, I mean, you could transfer the majority of the money that Biden has raised, you can transfer to whoever the nominee is, but there is still tens of millions of dollars that you probably could not transfer to anyone except for Kamala Harris.
More with Alex Thompson after the break. Stay with us. Okay, so this is the man that carries around the nuclear football. There were conversations I was seeing about, with serious people talking about invoking the 25th Amendment. What are you hearing about that? How is this person the president right now? And is that something that's being openly discussed in Democratic circles?
I mean, the 25th Amendment is not being openly discussed. And if it's being discussed in the places that matter, I'm not aware of it right now. But that being said, I think you honed in on what the real story of the debate was. The real story of the debate was not that Joe Biden might now lose to Donald Trump. The real story was is this guy, even among Biden aides, was is this guy okay?
Yeah, is he capable of serving out the responsibilities for president of the United States? So in September of 2020, Brit Hume said, I don't think there's any doubt that Joe Biden is senile. And PolitiFact did a fact check, declared Brit Hume's assessment false, and noted that the term senile is an imprecise term. So PolitiFact contacted experts in the healthcare of older people for their take on Brit Hume's use of the word senile and its application to Biden. They say Hume's characterization is wrong. It's a shameful display of ageism and ignorance. The word senile may create a mental picture of someone who has stoop posture, is slow-moving, and cognitively impaired. I don't think any of these descriptors match Joe Biden's demeanor and vigor. From geriatrician's perspective, the use of senile as a pejorative descriptor reflects unmitigated ageism. And this expert said he'd seen Joe Biden in purpose, watched him during the debates, said he's noticed that periodically Biden pauses and he has a perplexed look on his face as he collects himself to compensate for his stutter. 80% of communication is through nonverbal cues. I feel people misinterpret Joe Biden's facial expressions as something other than his adaptations to a childhood speech impediment.
Is he, because you have to be, if there had been an attack and Joe Biden is acting like that, what does that look like? And I think his mental fitness to serve ended up, in my mind, is the real story of that debate. And a lot of Biden people, I think were maybe he can't do this job even a year more. And to your point, maybe even 7 months more. And, I remember, some people said after, the next day, he does this big rally in North Carolina, has really high energy and is and he's great. I mean, it was a good performance for an 81-year-old. And, sort of the answer was the problem is that the Biden that you saw in the debate exists at all, because it's potentially in the eyes of a lot of voters, it's potentially disqualifying that a president could ever be that lost.
One of the arguments that's sort of gotten trotted out a lot since Thursday is the idea that, well, yeah, he's out of it sometimes. Yeah, he can't really be sharp after 4 p.m., but it doesn't really matter because the people around him are competent. And the presidency is not really a guy so much as an office, right? The idea of the presidency as a group that's now getting what do you think of that?
I mean, Obama's DHS Secretary Jay Johnson, who was in the mix to be in the Biden cabinet during the transition, they said that on Morning Joe yesterday, which he's if Biden has April Haynes and Samantha Power and Gina Raimondo around him, I'd definitely still vote for him over Trump. And I mean, as a reporter, I find that argument really offensive, and especially coming from the crowd that is telling us all the time that that they are the pro-democracy party. And then you're just going to have all these like unelected, like we're going to have like Jeff Zients and Jake Sullivan, like running foreign policy and the domestic policy arms of the government. It just, that argument to me, which, Democrats have made. I remember one Democrat, and this was a while ago when I was, they were just, and they always say like, but he has good people around him, and I was like, I don't care, like as a reporter, I don't care. Like they're not elected.
Right.
But there are definitely some like, DC.
Right. If democracy is on the ballot, as the Democrats have been pushing for the past 8 years, then how can you be okay with other people doing Joe Biden's job, essentially?
People have heard the argument articulated, including by reporters, that, it would probably be fine.
Alex, a few last questions. Is there anything at all Biden could do right now to staunch the bleeding and regain public confidence? Like, what would he have to do?
I'll tweak your question a bit and be like, I have no idea because I'm not a political strategist, but I'll tell you what, like, he would have to do to regain sort of like, in terms of my skepticism that he can do the job, that I think is like completely merited from his performance. The only thing that he could do to potentially restore that is he has to go everywhere. Like he has done the least amount of interviews with reporters than any president in decades.
Yeah, what if Joe Biden forgets the nuclear code? What if he forgets the password to launch our nukes?
He has to not just sit down with George Stephanopoulos in a recorded interview that could then be edited. He has to do live interviews with every single anchor. He has to go and do an hour interview with the New York Times, with the Wall Street Journal, with the Washington Post, with me, with he hasn't even sat down with Reuters. I mean, this is like, it's just sort of weird to me. Like, he's got to prove that he's with it. And the fact that he hasn't, I think that would be the only way, at least in my mind, that you would sort of see a shift.
Okay, Jack Posobiec is a flawed character. Oh, but sometimes he has a way with words. And as once you replace our democracy with our regime, every time they say it, it makes so much more sense.
At least my coverage, and I think a lot of other reporters' coverage.
I think one of the most striking things about, like, if you think about the big stories that we're going to remember from the past few insane days and from Thursday night, I think one of those stories, and I don't think this is too navel-gazy, is a media story, right? How was it that the press corps in this country missed or ignored one of the biggest stories of our lifetime, which is that the president might not be fully there? And how is it that something that was framed as misinformation, as disinformation, as, Trump simping, as whatever you want to call it, went from being misinformation to common knowledge over the space of 90 minutes on Thursday night? Alex, explain that to us. Was this an intentional lack of curiosity? Was this not wanting to look? Was it something darker than that? Or was it genuinely that many people that are meant to report every day on the most powerful man in the world got successfully spun by the people around him?
I think there's elements of truth in a bunch of what you said. I think it's fair to say, and I have that there was a lack of curiosity among some. I also think that the White House was very effective in their comms operation of gaslighting, deflecting, denying things that were true. I mean, like the thing, you mentioned like the 10 to 4 thing. This is an example, like the 10 to 4 thing. Like I reported that a year ago, actually. I just re-upped.
And let's be honest, Donald Trump did not work long hours at the White House. So a 6-hour workday seems approximately accurate for what Donald Trump did during his 4 years in office.
Literally, my boss was like, you need to re-up that detail after the debate because people didn't remember it and people never followed it. So just re-up it and everyone's going to be like, oh, this is new.
It felt new.
Yeah.
So that's a great example. When you first reported it, was there no reaction or was there a backlash reaction?
I mean, there's certainly, I mean, the White House went very public, very aggressively. You know, it's interesting. Like, they obviously are very aggressive during the process, but then there's this, you know, after the story is out, they were very publicly aggressive, tried to discredit some, you know, pointing to some of my other stories and trying to like discredit the information. You know, I bring that up because, you know, the Times did a little bit of like a follow-up a few months later, but then it had a lot of Trump stuff in it. You know, I do think there was a lack of curiosity when it came to the age thing. And I think there was also, in some cases, a hesitancy of feeling like you were going to feed into what I think at the beginning was a bit of at least a bit of a bad faith narrative from some right-wing places about the severity of his limitations. And I think, you know, I was really struck by this quote, and otherwise I thought it was like compelling, but like Jill Abramson wrote this.
Jill Abramson, the former executive editor of the New York Times.
Thank you. Yes. And she wrote this, The Semaphore, but there was one line in there where she was like, I think some people didn't want to write about it because they were scared of helping Trump. I get that. And I was really surprised that she said, like, I get that. So that, as if it's understandable that people would not report something because they thought it might be to the political help of Trump. I have no reporters articulated that to me, maybe because they know that I would not be like a sympathetic ear to that. But given that she said it, it seems like there might be some reporters out there that do feel that way.
I don't think you can overstate how much social pressure is brought to bear on people that were using their eyes to notice things. My phone would blow up anytime we would, you know, even in Nellie's sort of Friday humorous column, notice that the president didn't seem to be like fully there in these clips. And we would get texts from people saying, you know, this is misinformation. When are you going to do the same thing about Trump? Why are you just like slagging on Biden? Are you doing that to help Trump? And it's like, well, no, our job as journalists is to notice things and help make sense of the things we're seeing in the world. And I think that maybe the strongest example of this backlash that wasn't happening in private, it was happening in public, was when the Journal about a month ago came out with a big story. They talked to 25 different people, and it noticed the thing that we all got to see on Thursday night. And the response to the reporters and to the Journal itself was really overwhelming. And I wondered if you want to comment on that, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, I know Annie Linsky was the lead byline on that story, and I called her that day, and I was like, told her I thought the response was bullshit. Because, and you know, the thing that I found so funny about it was, like, I think the headline was like, behind closed doors, Biden shows signs of slipping. And I was like, behind closed doors? Like we've all seen it. Like, it's there. You know, the thing that was really disappointing, I think some of it was predictable. The fact that the Journal, the fact that the Journal's only on the record quotes came from Republicans gave Democrats a big.
All right, there are lots of reasons to be grateful on this July 4. Tyler Austin tweets on this July 4th, I'm grateful to live in a country where a demented octogenarian can cling to the highest office in the land, propped up by a crack fiend and a woman with a PhD in nonsense doing her best Lady Macbeth impression. We are a land of boundless opportunity for all.
Very easy way in this politicized environment to attack the story and try to undermine it. And I think that was predictable, and maybe there were ways they could have blunted that. But the thing that I was disappointed on is that I feel like, and I'm not going to name names, but I feel like some reporters also helped out with trying to undermine, or at least sort of, you know, give people pause or suggest that maybe it wasn't completely on the up and up. Reporters, and I don't know their motives. Maybe they were sucking up to the White House. Maybe they really believed the Wall Street Journal was wrong. But I thought, I didn't think it was, I was surprised, even in this environment. And I think, you know, in retrospect, you know, I think you can, I believe that you can rationalize, I think you can forgive some reporters for not covering it as aggressively up to a certain point. And I think the point.
And a good comment in the chat. Bill Clinton lost his nuclear biscuit, causing us to have to reprogram every nuke and put our retaliatory response at risk for about 4 months. And you can Google the story. President Bill Clinton lost nuclear codes while in office. Former chairman of the Joint Chiefs says the nuclear biscuit went missing for months.
In which I don't think it's very easily explainable is after the Hur report. That is which Robert Hur was the special counsel, looked into Biden's and handling of classified documents, wrote in his report that Biden had presented himself as like an old man with a bad memory. Once the Hur transcript came out, it was clear that Biden had repeated mental lapses throughout the interview. And the headlines instead were very nuanced and like very muddled. And her report was like the first big, like, hey guys, like something is happening. And then the second one was the Wall Street Journal story in terms of like big things. So when reporters say that they were shocked at Biden's performance at the debate, I mean, I think there were warnings.
I want to end on one last thing. I'm just looking at Twitter, and Meghan McCain tweeted this. When all of this is over, I hope there's some real journalistic soul searching and a Pulitzer Prize for Alex Thompson at Axios for being the only mainstream political reporter in the entire country who reported on Biden's health decline while everyone else looked the other way.
I don't know Meghan. That's nice for her to say.
Well, Alex Thompson, we'll look forward to the Pulitzers next year. And in the meantime,
great interview there by Bari Weiss of Alex Thompson, national political correspondent for Axios. All right, let's get a little bit from Anthony Scaramucci.
To interrupt me, trust me, I like listening to you more than myself. But here's what I would say, and I'll start with the top line. I think Joe Biden will be out of the race by the end of July. So I'm going to make some speculation here on our podcast.
Okay.
And I think there's a number of different ways to go where he says he's going to finish out his term, which I think is unlikely. And so I'm going to make the following speculation because some people inside the campaign have told me this will be the most consequential few weeks in American modern history. And so that implies that we're going to get a President Harris. And so President is frail.
Talk me through that, because I'm hearing the same thing that everybody says this week and next week are huge in terms of American politics. I'm hearing something slightly different on the trajectory. So talk me through the Harris link there.
Okay. So again, this is some speculation. I'm not saying this is fact, but the thought would be that he resigns from office and she runs as President Harris. And there'll be some people that like that. There'll be some people that don't like that. We can talk about the racial divide in the country and the tension, but that would help their progressive flank a lot. She is the first woman president in U.S. history. She would be the first woman of color as president in U.S. history. And I think it also solves a lot of their campaign finance issues. And of course, they can shore her up with a very credible.
Right. Interesting comments here in the chat by Detention Hall Push. Bill Clinton lost his nuclear biscuit, causing us to have to reprogram every nuke and put our retaliatory response at risk for about 4 months. Don't just Google it. I worked on reprogramming our nukes. Look, they tried everything, including having assigned multiple NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, to keep it covered up. All right. How did the Washington Press Corps miss Biden's decline?
A lot of people are wondering how they allowed Biden to get this far. It's the question on some Democrats' minds this week, with many blaming the White House press corps. Jill Abramson, the former executive editor of the New York Times, wrote in Semaphore, quote, "It's clear the best news reporters in Washington have failed in the first duty of journalism to hold power accountable. It's our duty to poke through White House smokescreens, find out the truth. The Biden White House clearly succeeded in a massive cover-up of the degree of the president's feebleness and his serious physical decline, which may be simply the result of old age. Shame on the White House press corps for not having pierced the veil of secrecy surrounding the president. Glenn Greenwald added that CNN is coming to a similar conclusion. In an article, CNN quotes a reporter who says the White House press shop has also been very aggressive and fairly successful in mitigating coverage of concerns over the president's age. The reporter essentially says the press corps knew how much age stories angered the White House and the liberal Twitter sphere.
CNN's Jake Tapper also blaming top Democratic officials for trying to convince the public that Joe Biden's in great shape. Take a look.
There is a discernible pattern of Democratic officials seemingly trying to convince you, the public, to not believe what you saw and what you heard with your eyes and with your ears on Thursday night.
Yeah, there's no way around it. A lot of people are asking why it wasn't made more evident to the American people that the decline has become so bad. Of course, there are a number of possible explanations, one being that the press themselves were shielded from it. Obviously, they've done those press conferences, a couple of them where they've asked some confrontational questions, and he's totally trailed off. There was one specifically about Israel where he forgot who was in negotiations, and someone in one of the press reporters had to say, Hamas, you mean Hamas. There have been moments like that. Really, I think it was mainly not so much the press corps, although I see that argument. To me, it's the White House itself constantly and aggressively engaged on spin on behalf of Biden and denying that there's anything wrong with him and attacking journalists, some conservative journalists, but also mainstream journalists for pretending otherwise. And then the talking heads on cable news who are very much, not officially part of the White House, but are in the Biden camp, who tried to cover up the age-related questions.
Yeah, I think that's broadly right. There's a misconception about the press corps that I think is in people who are lucky enough to not have to do this for a living, which is that they think the press corps has total access to the president, that they can wander into the Oval Office and ask him questions, when in fact the reporting that we've seen come out is of a president who's very closely guarded by top advisors, who even junior level advisors have trouble getting directly to without extensive scheduling appointments, without being very closely checked, and meetings are generally kept very short. Joe Biden is not the kind of president who's hanging out in the press room, jawing with people like Bill Clinton did for hours at a time.
Yeah.
He is a very distant figure. But at the same time, we also know that the press corps is an access-based organization, that they're going to prize access over telling a really tough story that may result in them not getting a scoop or being left out of the next big story. And that's a real conflict that I think the press corps itself struggles to resolve.
Where I think the press went most wrong with respect to the Biden mental decline question is in not realizing earlier that this was a top concern of Americans and having their reporting reflect the seriousness of that question. Polling has shown for a very long time now that a majority of Democrats had serious doubts about Biden's ability to run for re-election.
Yep.
Even if they support him and want him to be president, they have these serious doubts. And that has been the reality for a long time. And there have not, most of the reporting on Biden's age or he's too old has come from adversarial conservative news sources. I think a lot of people in Washington, liberal media figures, mainstream media figures, were about, this is all about the issues, which it is about the issues. Don't get me wrong. Inflation, immigration, foreign policy, other things. Issues do matter. These two figures are very well known. I don't think it's really a clash of personalities. I think it is about the issues. It's about the issues and the reality of Biden's fitness for the office given his advanced age. That has come through in the polling so clearly. I think it's not been a focus of the press corps. You're right, though, that it's an access-based thing, and they've not had a lot of access to him. But I think a lot of people writing about...
Okay, here's an analysis of the Biden-Trump debate from a psychiatrist who I assume has a left-wing bias. But I think he had some useful points about what the debate revealed about their mental health.
Certainly, by our current criteria, both men have ADHD. So I was interviewed by David Pakman. There have been more than 460,000 people have seen the video discussing Donald Trump's stimulant use. This was done just before the interview, but he displayed the 3 signs that I've said to watch out for as evidence of it. So I measured certain behaviors and performances. And this data goes back to Trump's third debate with Hillary Clinton 8 years ago, when after the first two debates, people said he doesn't even seem to be really interested in this. He's rambling, he's discursive, he's didn't prepare, he's not ready, and that he needs to show that he's presidential for the third debate. In that third debate, observers said, whether or not they like the content of what he said, he's more coherent, looks plausible as a leader. And if you look at that third debate, or you look at this most recent debate, or you look at certain State of the Union speeches or other important speeches he gave, and you contrast that to his other performances that very week, there are three noticeable, really detectable, huge differences. One is reduced movements. When he's talking in other settings, he is moving close to a movement a second. Shifting body position, hands gesturing, head bobbing, head shaking, pursing his lips. When he's on stimulant medication, and stimulant medication with someone with ADHD will do this, he's moving around only about a third as much, a huge difference. Now, could that just be solely from voluntarily focusing on it? Possibly. But simultaneously, there's what I call increased coherence. So separate from the truthfulness, the veracity, the reality-basedness of his statements, does one sentence follow another sentence? Is there any logical connection to a outside listener outside of his brain? And in his other presentations, coherence is as low as about 60%. For most politicians, it's upwards of 90%. In his instances when he's taking stimulants, his speech is much more coherent in the high 80%. So a marked increase in coherence. Now again, some with ADHD, if they're focusing on that part of their behavior, may improve, but it's almost unheard of for someone to simultaneously be able to reduce their movements, because if you're focusing on that, you're less aware of your speech and less in control of it. Or if you're controlling your speech, your movements aren't going to be going in a good or more controlled direction. So that in itself is fairly compelling. But the kicker or third point is that during these times, his pupils are substantially dilated. If you look at the debates where the two men are under similar lighting, comparing him to Biden, Trump's are much larger than Biden's. If you compare Trump to himself, other speeches that same week, his pupils are small, and particularly his pupils are large and he's squinting more than usual. That's a sign that, so your pupil can do, is supposed to change size in accordance with how much light there is. It should get smaller. If you are squinting and your pupils are big, that's strongly indicative that something is causing your pupils to be dilated more than is appropriate for the lighting condition right there. So other things besides lighting that can change pupil size is emotion camp.
So I think this is great news that Donald Trump is getting medicated for his ADHD.
Someone excited, someone scared, someone trying to focus really intently. But those changes are changes on the order of a few seconds. Throughout the entire debate, Trump's pupils are dilated. And there's certain brain damage and other things that can cause dilated pupils. But again, he is showing pupils dilated for hours at a time and that they're not dilated within a day or two afterwards. The only class of medication that does that are stimulant medications. We can say with certainty, Trump is taking stimulant medications certain times and not consistently taking this. Doesn't tell us what he's taking, doesn't tell us whether it's a prescription medicine, doesn't tell us whether he has a legitimate prescription for it or not. But we should actually be encouraging him to take it more often, because for someone with ADHD, he is less impulsive, more coherent, more organized, more effective as a person when he's taking it. So jumping over to Parkinsonism. So I am not a neurologist, but partly because I was willing to work with Medicare patients, I've always had a large segment of elderly patients in my population. There's not a work week in the past 30 years where I have not seen at least one Parkinson patient. So I've had numerous patients with Parkinsonism that I worked with over decades. Psychiatrists do have some training in neurology beyond what general medical doctors do. I'm not pretending it's the same as a neurologist. I'm not pretending I am a neurologist, but so what are the criteria for Parkinsonism? The official criteria are actually pretty simple outline. Bradykinesia, which is slow movements, plus one or the other of tremor or rigidity. That's it. Now, so that's it, the core definition of Parkinsonism. Usually a physical exam is helpful to help evaluate in more detail. So to check for, is the rigidity a pattern called cogwheeling, where there's resistance and then lack of resistance at different states. To examine postural instability, which is a characteristic of Parkinson's. So I'll go through the symptoms that I observed during the debate that Joe Biden did not have 4 years ago. So one, a shuffling gait. And it's not just shuffling gait, it's hard to start, then he goes with small steps, and he does speed up a little as it goes along. That is called a festinating gait. Festinating. That is a classic symptom of Parkinson's. Now, his aides have said, oh, yeah, his gait, he has spinal arthritis. That explains it. The guy doesn't appear to be in any pain when he's walking this way. Could he also have spinal arthritis? He could, but that doesn't seem to be a good match for actually what we are seeing. Second symptom, what's called masked face or masked faces in official neurologic terminology. During this debate, there was very little facial expression, even when he was getting emotional, even when he looked frozen. About the only facial expression he succeeded in conveying was sort of dazed confusion at different times. Again, the bradykinesia slow movements include frozen movements. For Parkinsonism, a masked face is classic for it. Can there be a few other conditions that cause it? Yes. But again, shuffling gait and masked face together, strongly suggestive. Now, speech. And I knew that, so I actually went to the Parkinson organization speech, and this is their definition said, hoarseness, having a low volume, trouble starting with speech, made speed up as it gets going, and ending in mumbles. That is almost a perfect description of Biden's speech patterns during the debate. Now, his hoarseness was dismissed as he had a recent cold. I did not detect a single cough during that whole 90-minute debate. There might have been one or two. I didn't detect them. That doesn't fly. Yes, you can be hoarse after a cold, but most people are still coughing if that's the source of it. Some people have also brought up his stuttering. Yes, that could contribute to starting sentences. But again, this is a marked deviation from his own appearances, his own presentation, his neurological presentation. Now, one thing, and I should preface all of this maybe that most of my news I get by reading. I did watch the debates. I don't watch much other news. I did not see whether he had a tremor or not. And with Parkinson's, what's classic is what's called a resting tremor. So hand is shaking when it's sitting there, but if you're doing a task, and finger to nose is one of them, it's usually pretty steady. It's not missing the nose. It's not a movement tremor. In fact, there's sort of case studies of famous surgeons who develop Parkinson's who are tremoring at rest, but then when they're using their scalpel, this is the old days, could execute their movements safely and securely and reliably because their movement during an action wasn't affected. So one thing I should note, though, both men, not just in this debate, but if you go back 4 years, 8 years when they're debating crowded fields of people, so when Biden had 6 or 7 Democratic competitors, he was the only one holding onto his podium most of the time. Now, that's a good way to hide a Parkinsonian tremor. It's also a good way to hide ADHD hyperactivity. And in the Republican debates of, again, 8 years ago when Trump showed up and there were multiple competitors and multiple people to compare him to, he was, again, the only Republican who was pretty steadfastly clinging to his podium and holding it. Could they both have balance problems? Could they have other reasons? Could it just be a pattern they developed? Possibly, but I think both men, either consciously or unconsciously, were doing it to not reveal hyperactivity. So,
okay, let's get some analysis here.
Founder and director of the University of Virginia's Center for Politics, and he's also, of course, the man behind the very closely watched political ratings report, Sabato's Crystal Ball, which predicts the likely outcomes of races across the country. So, Larry, you just downgraded 2 key states for Biden. Michigan, now a toss-up. You had previously said it leaned Democratic, and Minnesota also slipping here from a likely victory for President Biden to just leaning blue. Why?
Well, certainly the debate played a role, although I need to stress, as others have, that President Biden had already slipped behind before the debate. He was behind President Trump, before he got on that stage, and it's only gotten worse since. It's pretty stunning to see the CNN poll and a couple of other polls today showing that Trump has a 6-point lead over Joe Biden, and it's 8 points if you consider the entire pool of registered voters. Joe, I tell you what's shocked a lot of Democrats and Democratic donors and others. It's the fact that Donald Trump, for the first time ever, is on the edge of 50%. He's right there. We thought for years that his high watermark was 46%, which is essentially what he got in 2016 and 2020. This is serious business, and it has got worse. And I think people also are taking it more seriously because of the Supreme Court decision about presidential immunity.
What can you tell us about the president and vice president's meeting with Democratic governors tonight? Well, look, he needed to get out there and start talking to Democrats. What's remarkable is that we're almost a week after that debate. And for the first time, really, in the last 24 hours, he began talking with senior Democrats. He didn't call Hakeem Jeffries, the House Democratic leader, until last night. He didn't talk to Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer until today. And he didn't talk to the governors until this evening. And I think a lot of Democrats were quite frustrated by that. It's not just the
Right, this is Peter Baker of the New York Times speaking on MSNBC last night.
debate itself that they've been, upset about. It's actually been how they've handled it since then. So he's trying to get out there and say, I am in it to win. Privately, though, he understands that that's not necessarily in his full control at this point, that there are, in fact, circumstances in which he might not be able to keep going forward. He knows that this interview he's going to give to George Stephanopoulos on Friday is going to be critical. He has to be able to show that he is vigorous, that he can answer the questions that people have raised. And if it doesn't go well, then we're not quite sure where things are going to go.
Eugene, you gave me one of the few last.
Right, this is David
You must
Ignatius.
have thought I told you so.
So I didn't think I told you so much as that the evidence was there in front of everyone nearly a year ago. My column last September summarized a poll that had been taken the previous month in August of last year that said that 77% of the American public and 69% of Democrats thought that Biden was too old to run for another term. That was nearly a year ago. The public view was clear. Rather than accept and deal with that public statement, the Biden campaign chose to, I think, engage in a campaign of denial. The argument was, no, it's not President Biden who has troubles with his memory, his cognition, it's Trump. And in our binary system, it couldn't be true that both Trump and Biden had problems that, in my view, should have disqualified both. So we arrived at the debate really with the Biden campaign having resisted this public judgment, the evidence that was before, I think, everyone's eyes for a year, that Joe Biden will, however fine a president. I should say, Mark, to your viewers, I think Biden's done a very good job in most respects, but he is aging, and the idea that 4 more years he will still be a strong and effective president, I thought stretched credulity. But the message wasn't received a year ago when I wrote it, and I think people are finally, with a sudden, stark realization, understanding that it's true.
So all of a sudden, we're seeing reports emerge that the president doesn't work before 10 a.m., after 4 p.m., that he has attention lapses and so on, as if this was a secret and it's now coming out in the open and sending Democrats to worry, panic, maybe find a solution.
So there is a sense of panic in Washington these days. We'll see how it plays out over coming days. The president is trying to convince people one last time that he's still sharp, he can do it, he's surrounded by.
Right, from CNN.
Biden and his presidential campaign. There are people out there wondering whether he should stay in the race.
From
However,
3 days ago.
No prominent elected Democrats have said that he should drop out just yet. And
okay, this was 3 days ago.
one historian who has predicted 9 out of 10 presidential elections says replacing the president could cost Democrats in November. With us now is Alan Lichtman, presidential historian and history professor at American University. Professor, when we last heard from you Friday night with Abby Phillip, you said no, replacing President Biden would be a mistake. You've had 2 more days to think about it. How do you feel this morning?
Even more strongly that it would be a mistake. You know, all of those who are calling for Biden's withdrawal, they have 0 track record in predicting elections. And yet they presume to tell us what the Democrats need to do to win this election. And remember, all the pundits, watched Hillary Clinton win 3 debates in 2016. They all said Trump was finished after Access Hollywood, and they are so often wrong. I have a system, as you know, that's been successful. I would say 10.
Joining me now is historian and distinguished professor of history from American University, Alan Lichtman. We want to thank you for being here. You correctly predicted 9 of the last 10 elections. Great track record. I know you think that Biden is still the best bet for Democrats to win in November, but you can't deny the calls for him to drop out are deafening. So what should Democrats do at this point?
All right. I'm going to give you my plan A and my plan B.
Great.
First of all, let me say all of these operatives and pundits and journalists who are calling for Biden to drop out have no system for moments of the White House party. There are 13 keys. If 6 go against the White House party, they're predicted losers. Biden checks off the incumbency key and the contest key. That means 6 more would have to fall of the remaining 11 to predict their defeat. Biden just steps out and they have a big party brawl to replace him. They lose both those keys and only 4 would have to fall to predict their defeat. But here's my plan B. My plan A is Biden stays in. My plan B is, let's presume hypothetically, I have no inside information, that the party pushes him out. Here's what he should do. He should resign the presidency for the good of the country. That would be a very popular move. Kamala would become president, checking off the incumbency. He would release his delegates to Harris, make sure that she's the consensus nominee, so you wouldn't have a party fight, and you would check off the contest key as well. So it would still take 6 keys for the Democrats to lose. That's the only way Biden should get out of this race and preserve Democrats' chance to win.
You know, as we follow that bouncing ball with these scenarios, polling averages in key swing states show that Biden is losing support. We've been talking about this. We know that these are the states that will clinch the election. So shouldn't Democrats be taking this seriously? I mean, I think that many are. But if Biden did drop out, could Vice President Harris win since she already is part of the ticket? You know, she's competitive against Trump in the latest polling as we take a look. In a Reuters Ipsos poll, it found Michelle Obama was the only Democrat who could beat Trump head to head by double digits, no less. She has never held elected office.
Take the polls and do to them what the great British philosopher David Hume said, do to works of superstition, consign them to the flames. Remember, all the polls and all the pundits were assuring us Hillary Clinton could not possibly lose in 2016. The eminent Sam Wang, the head of the Princeton Polling Consortium, said he was 99% confident based on the polls that Clinton would win and that he would eat a bug on television if she lost, and he did eat that bug. So, you know, if you want to be poll driven, that is the prescription down the primrose path of error. That's why I rely on the keys. And if Biden resigns and Harris becomes the president, that scrambles everything. And none of these keys mean a darn thing, but she secures the party contest key and the incumbency key.
Right, here's the psychiatrist again.
Had 2 debates, and the critics and I think the general population saw Trump wandering around the stage, wandering around in his speech, unfocused, unprepared. He had publicly said he wasn't going to do any preparation work. And people were saying, unless he gets his act together for the 3rd debate, he's not even plausible as a candidate. Lo and behold, October 19th, the 3rd debate comes. And whether or not you like the content of his speech, whether you agree with his thoughts, most observers said, he's sort of staying in one place. He's more or less answering some of the questions. His sentences, one flow from another. He looks more presidential. And if you look at the polling from, and I'm looking at the 538 collective polling numbers from October 19th in the 3 weeks till the election, Trump's polling numbers go up 3%. Hillary stayed pretty much flat. There's a tiny dip, much less than 1% after the Comey verdict. So we can say that his performance in that debate may be well responsible for why he got elected. So as someone who is already aware that Trump has ADHD, and I can get into that whole discussion, I was thinking what could be going on that could make someone who, you know, what was actually going on in the presentation and why did he look more presidential? So I began by looking at just physical gestures, and I measured any movement that was more than 10 centimeters. So it could be hand gestures, it could be body gestures, it could be moving around. And in the first 2 debates, he's making 42 of these gestures a minute. 42. That's, you know, he's never still. The 3rd debate, it drops down to 13 a minute. That's dramatically, he's sitting there calmly. Now, someone with ADD, if they're really focusing on their behavior, you know, if they're holding themselves, they might be able to control that. So that doesn't in itself prove anything, but stimulants are one of the things that we know that makes someone with ADHD less hyperactive. So then I looked, and this is a somewhat squishier measure on what I call coherence of his speech. And that's just, does one sentence have any logical connection to the sentence before it? Again, not whether it's true, not whether it's mean or stupid, but just does it follow? You'll see throwing in a comment about Rosie O'Donnell. And in his first 2 debates, his rate of coherence, by my measure, is about 64%. That shoots up to 85%. Now, most of us are more coherent than that anyway, but that's still a marked improvement. And what's more compelling about these 2 together, that's simultaneously happening while his gestures are getting less hyperactive. Now, someone with ADHD, if they're really wanting to be more coherent, may focus on their speech. But if you're focusing on your speech, your body is going to be more out of control. So to have his body in more control and his speech more in control is highly suggestive, but still circumstantial evidence that he was taking stimulants. But the real kicker is if you look at what happens to his pupils. And both Hillary, and here I compared his to Hillary because they're under the similar lighting conditions. The first 2 debates, their pupils are about 10 to 15% covering their iris, pretty small, you know, they're under bright lights. In the 3rd debate, Hillary's are the same. They're still about 10 to 15% covering her surface. His blow up to 40 to 50%. So a huge dilation of his pupils. And that is one of the things that stimulant medications do, is they dilate your pupils. There's a few other classes of medicines and a few other things. There can be lighting issues, but again, clearly it's not a lighting issue. So to have these 3 things simultaneously happening, pupil dilation, reduced hyperactivity.
So I wonder what media reporter Brian Stelter and Chris Hayes have to say about our politics.
1 year of all you can read, watch.
That, and again, I'm not blaming you. We're doing this. Everyone's sort of dealing with the same thing. The news is the news, but the sort of combination of the immunity decision, which is, I would say, probably the most shocking or worst decision since Bush v. Gore, although Bush v. Gore was cabined.
We were going to tape with Chris and run this. So let's start with the debate. Take me back to last Thursday night. You were sitting on set. Were you watching it actually at 30 Rock on the set, ready to go?
Yeah, I watched on set. Most people cleared out. Rachel and I were the only ones who stayed on set to watch. And yeah, it was catastrophic. I mean, one thing I think it's worth noting is nothing was as bad as the first 50 minutes. Of course, that's the most watched part of the debate and also where the impressions are formed. And there was particularly like a very marked decline in Trump's ability over the course of the debate, like quite intensely. His first few answers were kind of crisp and, like, I would even say normal politician answers where he's kind of making his point, getting in, getting out. And then, you know, by the end, we're getting like, we had H2O and let me go back and relitigate suckers and losers 10 times. And but Biden's first 3 or 4 answers were, I would say, is from a political communication standpoint, as poorly as I've seen a politician of that stature communicate ever.
And when you're about to speak about this on live TV, what are you thinking? Are you thinking, oh, geez, the viewers are not going to want to hear this? Or are you thinking, wow, this is a genuinely dramatic political moment? What are you thinking?
Well, I mean, I guess I would say that I don't think it comes as any surprise to anyone who watches my show or listens to the podcast who happens to be listening to this. And there may be people who are totally unfamiliar with me, but like, I'm not pretending to have any other politics than the one that I have or to care about things in any different way. I think that's what distinguishes. I mean, I think this is such an amazing moment when you compare the aftermath of Trump's conviction to the aftermath of the debate. I mean, the aftermath of the debate has been maybe 100 times as big a story, I would say. Maybe 10x, maybe 100x, somewhere in there. And the reason that it's been much bigger story is that the center-right media never batted an eye. They were like, it's awesome that he was convicted. It's great. We love it. Everyone should be convicts. and the entire Republican Party just unified. And so there was no real story. It was just like, what are you going to do? That has not been the case with Biden's debate performance. And so because of that, because the center-left media, broadly construed from the sort of mainstream media over, is much more disputatious, I think more reality-based. There's discourse and debate. You're getting this huge story, but also I think that's ultimately in the long run a good thing. And so what we've been doing on the show is just like, this is the conversation and debate that everyone I know, again, across what I would call the broad pro-democracy popular front of American politics, is that everyone in that coalition is having this debate.
Yeah, you and I were tweeting about this yesterday, Tuesday the 2nd. You were talking about the asymmetry between the right and the left and how glaring it is. The biggest takeaway you said from this week is just how different the two sides are. That the Democrats are able to have a reality-based conversation and not just so propaganda.
Okay, that'll do it for today.
Hi, it's
Cut it
Radhika
out.
Jones.
Stop.